Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, November 26th, and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is within the territories of the Shisha Nation and the Squamish Nation. And given the way we are coming to you via Zoom, we actually are all over that territory. So welcome everybody. We have an agenda in front of us. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Seeing none, I would look for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And we have a delegation with us today. We have Paul Fripp, BDO Canada LLP, regarding the audit planning report. And Paul, do you have a presentation for us? Oh, we can't hear you.
But you are unmuted, so not sure what's going on.
Yes.
Oh, we can hear you now. Maybe just turn your volume up some more.
Fantastic. So I'm not sure if it would be volume on my end, but
yes, it is. That's coming better. Thank you.
That's coming better. Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me this morning. I will just share my screen if that works for everyone. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So this is a copy of our audit planning report, which we have provided, dated November 13th. It reflects our audit planning to date. So there could still be changes to our audit plan subject to information that comes to light between now and our year-end audit procedures, which takes place in March and April. I'm been asked today to briefly run you through key aspects of this report to sort of bring some clarity around the audit process and also be available for any questions should those arise. I'm starting on page 2 of the letter. It's an executive summary which highlights certain key aspects of the report itself. I'm going to start with this section here called materiality. And so when we provide our audit opinion, it's not provided to an absolute level. It would be virtually impossible to audit to within the dollar. It would basically require us to be on site and review 100% of the transactions that's processed by Tina and her team, which pretty sure Tina would get pretty tired of us. But at any rate, our materiality level that has been set, which is that threshold for error within the financial statements, has been set at 1.45 million for all items that are operating in nature. So this is, anything that runs through your statement of operations. And then we have a separate materiality level for infrastructure, which is predominantly tangible capital assets, set at 2.7 million. The difference between the two is because there really are sort of two primary I won't call them departments because there are many different departments in the local government, but for auditing purposes, two sort of distinct groups of sort of assets and operations that are very different in nature. One is sort of facilities management, infrastructure management, which tend to deal with very, very, very large dollar values and happen sort of large capital projects, although they're ongoing, happen less frequently. Our auditing in this area will focus in on those material capital projects. And then when we're identifying potential errors, we're evaluating against this higher threshold. Everything else, as well as our scoping for testing, is evaluated against this lower materiality level of 1.45 million. There's additional information on page 7 of the report on materiality. So if you're interested in other aspects of materiality, I would direct you there to have a look. The overall engagement objective is for us to provide an opinion on the financial statements, whether they are presented fairly in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. Got more about sort of the roles and responsibilities, the roles of the auditor versus those charged with governance versus management later on in the letter. But I think that's an important distinction. Sometimes there's sort of a misperception of what financial statement audit is intended to address. We do evaluate the accuracy and the presentation of the transactions that have occurred historically for the period in question. So that's for the year ended December 31st, 2020, is the district's fiscal year. And it's not intended to provide opinions around how effective management was or whether government funds are being utilized to their best potential. It really, that leaves it up to the users of the financial statement to make that analysis and those assessments. Concerning fraud, audits are required to contemplate fraud to the extent that they could create a material misstatement in the financial statements. Now, we don't always assess errors in the financial statements against these materiality levels of 1.45 million. We have to assess their qualitative nature, and a fraud would typically be of a nature where we would ignore materiality, quantitative materiality thresholds. At any rate, we would report back to the board regarding any instances of irregularity, whether we detected any unusual occurrences within the financial statements. We do ask that those charged with governance, so the board as well as management, make us aware of any instances of actual suspected or alleged fraud that they have been made aware of in the in your capacities with the district. That's important information for us as it feeds into our audit planning process, and we can design procedures to discharge any risks that might arise from that information. The next page outlines the team of professionals who are at your disposal, as well as contact information. I would like to highlight that at the end of June this last year, Bill Cox, who's longtime partner with BDO Canada and has been part of the audit team for the district, did submit his retirement notice, and he is in his retirement period now. So he is still available to us as a support until his final day, which is fast approaching at the end of December. But we do have also Brian Zabo, who's a core member of our public sector team, who will be filling his shoes as the secondary support should there be a second opinion needed or some additional technical eyes on something in particular, or if for whatever reason I may have a conflict of interest, then Brian can also step in and assist with any other matters that may come up. Page 4 provides the board with an overview of the audit timeline. So right now we are in this planning process. Coming up soon, we do have our team who will be coordinating with Tina to conduct our formal planning procedures, which is where we essentially verify all our understanding that we've accumulated over the past years, verify that the controls are still operating effectively, conduct some audit testing to the extent that it's efficient to do so. This is an important step this year because of COVID-19 and having disruptions to workplaces and more remote workforces. We want to make sure that those control procedures are still operating as they're intended to operate. Our year-end audit fieldwork is scheduled to be conducted in the back half of March, with sort of finalizing the draft financial statements in and around mid-April with management, and coming to the board with the final report for presentation in late April. This is all intended to meet the ministry's deadline of May 15th, which has never been a problem in the past. I'm going to run you through a couple of our audit areas. These areas are highlighted for the board as they present areas that we have more focus on during our audit process. So the impact of COVID-19, I already explained the impact to internal controls, but there's also financial impacts from COVID-19, which are going to have impacts on, whether we can rely on analytics. There's going to be fluctuations in results. We also want to have a look at, impacts on funding received and how the revenue recognition was treated associated with that funding. Another area is the recognition of grant and government transfers revenue. This is a complex standard in public sector accounting standards. And so we do spend a substantial amount of time here to review the agreements and assessing whether the criteria has been met to reach the deferral criteria. The focus here is on whether it's actually met the appropriate criteria to hit a deferral. It's much more challenging to get to a deferral for government transfers than it is in other sets of accounting standards. Management override of internal controls. This is a mandatory audit risk. There's nothing that we've encountered in the past that would suggest that management is acting inappropriately. This is a requirement under Canadian auditing standards. Nevertheless, we're required to maintain professional skepticism throughout our audit, and we do so by looking at unusual transactions, non-recurring adjustments that are being posted through different areas of the general ledger that may indicate bias. We're also looking at the appropriateness of key estimates and any adjustments made in the financial statement preparation process that may achieve preferential financial statement presentation. Landfill liability. This is a complex standard under public sector accounting standards. It requires reliance on experts as well as complex calculations that work into determining the value of the liability. And so we undertake a number of procedures working with those experts and with management to review the inputs in arriving and the calculation of that liability. And last but not least, staff compensation. This is an area that's generally the single largest expenditure for most local governments, and it's an area of scrutiny for taxpayers. And so we do spend time here to ensure that it's a tight process. Our focus here is on internal controls, and so we do review the controls in place in the payroll system, which would include hiring new staff and departures and the controls around those occurrences. I'm going to skip by the materiality. We've discussed that already, and this page number 8 provides an overview of how we use experts in the audit process and our reliance on their work. We don't rely on their work blindly. We are required to assess their competence and look at the ultimate product of their work to make sure that it conforms with our expectations. But there are 2 experts that are used by the district that we do rely on, and that's Mercer Canada and XCG Environmental Engineers. And, all right, so we're into the appendices now. Appendix A is just a listing of resources, and that's predominantly for management's benefit. Probably the most important one here is asset retirement obligations, which outlines a high-level approach to for implementation of this very complex and large standard. So this standard's effective for the district for the year ended December 31st, 2023. Very similar to the implementation of tangible capital assets back in 2010, and then contaminated sites about 2015, if I remember correctly. This requires a fairly comprehensive review of the district's tangible capital asset inventory, as well as assessing against standards, regulations, and contractual obligations to see if there is a liability on retirement of any of the district's infrastructure. Appendix B provides an outline of our audit strategy, fairly high level, so it's there for your information. We are in this first stage, which is in the identify and assess risks and design audit responses. And then Appendix C is an overview of the responsibilities of the auditor, those charged with governance and management. And so the auditor, we are engaged to express an opinion as to whether the financial statements present fairly in all material respects, the financial position, financial performance, and cash flows of the district in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. We also assist in these other areas. So, we work with management towards timely issuance of the financial statements. Where we identify improvements to procedures, we raise those in the form of our management letter, which you will have seen in the past. We present any significant findings to the board, specifically around accounting issues, any significant deficiencies in internal controls, and significant deficiencies. It's a rather serious matter in that we would believe that the deficiency there creates a risk of material misstatement, and so we would elevate that information to the board. It's an important distinction between what we highlight in our management letter, which we consider to be best practices, versus significant deficiencies. Other information, we are required to read the annual report to identify if there are material inconsistencies between the financial statements which were audited versus the information released in the annual report. And then we do support management year-round as need arises. This page provides an overview of our responsibility for detecting fraud. And it basically identifies that we are required to consider fraud through the conduct of our audit to the extent that it creates a material misstatement. But an audit cannot be relied upon to necessarily detect all instances of fraud, because they are covert and designed to be concealed. So we do identify and assess any risks of material misstatement due to fraud. That is conducted through our communication with the board as well as with management. And we also, based on our information of the organization and the results of our testing that we conduct, we do hold a brainstorming session to identify where fraud may be able to occur. Not necessarily that it is occurring, just may be able to occur. And we design tests accordingly to see if there's anything unusual happening in those areas. We do switch it up from time to time, so we don't always do the same procedures, and sometimes we'll cycle through. So there's an element of unpredictability in this testing. Moving on, so responsibilities of those charged with governance, so that would be the board, is to oversee the work of the external auditor, and to facilitate the resolution of disagreements between management and the auditor, and to review the financial statements and annual report prior to their publication. whereas management has been tasked with maintaining adequate accounting records and an appropriate system of internal controls, selecting and consistently applying appropriate accounting policies, to prepare the annual financial statements, that is management's role to do so, and to safeguard the district's assets and take reasonable steps to prevent and detect fraud and other irregularities. And as well to make available to us, the auditors, when required, all districts' accounting records and related financial information for the purposes of our audit. Appendix D is confirmation of independence. It outlines that we are not aware of any relationships or any services that we provide to the district that would create a threat to our independence as auditors. Independence is an important concept for auditing, as ultimately we provide an opinion, and we want to make sure that our opinion is not biased or perceived to be biased in any way. Appendix E provides an overview of the different accounting standards that are coming up with a potential to impact the district. I'm not going to go over these. The one that has the most significant impact is PS 3280, asset retirement obligations, as I mentioned earlier. And last but not least is a copy of our engagement letter, which is largely, the terms and conditions in here are largely dictated by Canadian auditing standards, including description again of what our role as auditors is, as well as the reporting that will be provided and the role of management and those charged with governance. At this time, we do not, your finance team is wonderful. They provide the financial statements, they prepare them, they stand behind their work, absolutely. Throughout the course of our audit, it's not unusual for the occasional correction to be identified. Where we do identify those potential corrections, we present those findings to management, and we will obtain the approval of any of those journal entries or account classification changes throughout the course of our audit. That's an important step because it ensures that management agrees with and takes full responsibility for the financial statements as they ultimately are presented to the board. All right. And last but not least, you're probably very interested, oh, what does this all cost? It's actually all was set previously in the proposal that was signed between us and the district back in 2016. So we live up to those commitments. All right. That takes us through the letter. I think I will pause now and take any questions, should there be any.
Much. Directors, any questions? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, for me, this is a highlight of the year. I don't know, other people don't like the audit, but for me, this is a highlight because for me, this is a key document. This oversight role is one of my main roles as an elected, to say that the SCRD is run according to the rules of public accounting. So I'm interested in this oversight role of how do I, as a board member, fulfill that role as specified to oversee this oversight. So that's the one question, bit general. And then there was one on page 10, which was the trivial threshold, which I don't recall that term before, and just what that is. So two pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. We must be on a different page number, and here we go. So I'll answer the trivial question because that's a little bit easier to answer. We wouldn't report every difference to the board. All of our differences are tracked. but those that are deemed to be clearly trivial in nature in relation to the financial statements as a whole are not reported up to management or those charged with governance. That's because they're below a threshold that could even possibly create a material misstatement. That threshold has been set on a standard benchmark, which is 5% of our materiality level. That's the first materiality level of 1.45 million. So it's that anything less than 5% of our materiality level, and our materiality level is set of based on 3% of the district's operation. So you can start to see that 5% of our materiality level actually makes up a very, very, very small percentage of the district's overall operations. Now, with regards to your comment about fulfilling your role as for financial oversight of the district's operations, and I think there's requirements as outlined and specified in the Local Government Act and various different pieces of legislation and regulation. I'm not an expert to speak to those. That would be your management team, as well as potentially lawyers if you wanted to seek very specific clarification on certain items outlined in that. From an audit perspective, and as a chartered professional accountant, I would say that the activities that you should be undertaking is, reviewing management's reports, understanding their content. If you don't understand the content, asking for clarification, looking for unusual relationships in that financial information. If you don't feel that you are obtaining the information necessary to be able to identify those, then working with management towards certain reports to be able to facilitate that. So that's my accountant's suggestion there.
Does that answer your question? Thank you. Director Mann.
I can't resist asking how often you turn up evidence of fraud. And then a little more seriously, if you did turn up a fraud, would that be publicly reported, to the taxpayers?
So our responsibility is to management and those charged with governance. We do detect fraud from time to time. More commonly, what it is that management, through their due diligence, identify matters of concern and raise those to us, which we assist them in discharging. We are required to communicate all of those instances to the board. Should the board wish to share that in a public forum, that is at the board's discretion. Typically, I think we would see that those matters are held in a closed session because of their sensitivity, especially if it's to discuss the nature of those. And at times they are still yet unproven. And so there's a desire not to necessarily tar somebody before appropriate steps have taken place. Largely, if we identify something that's concerning in nature and there's a desire to undertake a criminal investigation or to recoup some of the losses that were sustained, then a forensic audit needs to take place, which would involve specialists to do a very targeted look at areas of specific concern. In those circumstances, because of auditor independence, we wouldn't actually be able to undertake that work, and so that would then be something that we couldn't fully discharge in our audit. So then our responsibility would be to assess whether it has a material impact in the financial statements and determine how that should be presented and communicated. And we work with management and the board in those circumstances.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing no further questions, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate you being here and laying this out for us. And I know that it was requested that you come given the questions that we had last year at the end of the audit. So now we're being set up with, you know, the information that we need to make sure that we do the job that we need to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm
Thank you.
very happy to be here today. I'm always willing to attend any of these planning meetings. So please just let me know if it's desired.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, we'll move on to item 3. First, before we do that, let's have a motion to receive all the reports. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. We move on to Annex A. This is actually the information that the auditor just went through. So are there any questions about the report? Seeing no questions, would someone like to make the recommendations on page 1? Moved by Director McMahon, seconded by Director Hiltz. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on to Annex B. This is the Federal Gas Tax Community Works Fund policy, and this is coming back to us. We provided some input previously, and it's coming back to us for review and to move this forward. And Tina, did you want to speak to this?
Just here to answer any questions that about summarizes it. We've incorporated the changes into the policy, which has been attached. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yes, and I apologize for not having raised some of these before, but I read through this again and of course thought of new questions. So 6.1.3.2 says regular, annual, and/or supplemental funds will be allocated based on a prospective basis. What does that mean?
Go ahead.
Well, consequently, from time to time, the federal gas tax, and it actually happened in 2020, where they actually did a double payment. And so essentially, we have allocated the funding based on the prior allocation basis. So it's distributed to each of the rural areas based on the population base. So that's what we've done.
Questions, Director McMahon?
Oh, I got more. Okay,
do another one before we go to Director Ties.
Awesome. Under 6.2.3, the list of project areas that are given priority, I noticed that active transportation is not on that list, but it is in fact what we were spending gas tax money on previously. Is there a reason that it's not on the list?
No, but we can. I think that it's kind of chicken and egg. So we don't actually have that agreement with MOTI. We could add it if that was the desire to be more explicit in the policy.
Would that be covered off in 6.2.3B, where it says including capital investment plans? Could that be part of that? No?
Yes, it could. And I think you want to always be cautious with, trying to name everything in a policy. You want to keep it as generic as possible to give yourself as much flexibility. So even if there's some changes to the gas tax agreement, that we have some latitude with some of that. So, we can be more prescriptive in the policy, or we can try to be a little more generic in the sense to meet the criteria. So either way. And yes, it could be identified in the capital asset part of things.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I'm just going to give that some thought. I know that is one of the things in the gas tax criteria that we can spend money on. But given the history, I was just wondering if we wanted to flag it. So I'll think while Director Ties talks.
Okay, Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at 7.1.1, it says there, develop eligible proposals to present to the EA directors. It seems, I guess, partly because we don't have an agreement with MOTI, but also there doesn't seem to have been any kind of proposals that have come forward, and I guess staff is looking for guidance as to where we would want to spend gas tax funding. That's how I understand it. So I'm wondering if there could be and should be something like the grant and aid process, where once a year we have an intake and we mull over some possible projects, and suggestions could come from directors, staff, or even the public as to what we could do with gas tax funds. Just some thoughts.
Tina, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so there was a couple things in there. If I could answer sort of as a couple of points were made. So the first point where it was, the purpose of the policy to provide some more direction back to staff and some more transparency as far as the funds and their use to the public. So yes, that's one of the purpose of providing the policy and to have these conversations, as there was somewhat a precedent at the regional district that these were kind of saved for active transportation projects, but I think we've expanded. But I think that's what staff's looking for is, expanding those types of things. I think the board's strategic plan most certainly is guiding us either through asset stewardship or GHG reductions, which all are things that match with the SCRD. So I think we have that back. And so that was what was discussed as part of pre-budget, is that we're going to go back, and as part of round one, we're going to most likely present some options for funding through the gas tax as alternatives to potentially property taxation or those types of things. So there's that one. And then the second point is regarding having a community intake. So that was one of the points that was discussed a little bit at the last policy presentation. And if that was the desire of the board, we would actually have to modify this policy quite extensively, and we would then have to mirror a similar grant and aid process and procedure that would then outline how that process would happen with the community, because the same legislation that frames the regional grant and aid would have to then be incorporated into this policy. So it doesn't. So right now, the way the policy is outlined is we don't really have a mechanism for that where people would solicit, because you have to advertise per the Local Government Act, those types of things. But it doesn't mean that we can't do projects with some community groups where we already have somewhat of a relationship within a regional district service that fits with a regional district service. So Sprock Kids is a good example where that particular project would fit within the regional district because it's on an already regional district property. We have an agreement with the biking association, etc. So that's one that we already have on our books. So that would fit. It's the challenges where we actually don't really have a service that fits. Like say a community group came for a large capital infrastructure project, but we provide them, operational funding. That we would have to contemplate as potentially a new regional district service. So this is where you want to frame this out before we just say, going out to the public to how we want to use these funds. I think that how my advice back to the board would be, look, like, I think we have some agreement, especially with the rural directors and with the board, for staff to go back and look at the needs of the organization and that's kind of how it's laid out in the policy, is let's look internally as to our funding needs. I mean, the reports that are on this particular agenda would be a great demonstration where we could probably leverage some of the gas tax to soften some user fees or parcel tax going forward. Wood Creek is a very good example. So I think that's where, you know, either or, if the board wants to do that, we'd have to come back with a revised policy and a more thorough report back, and also consult with UBCM, which is already started as well, just as far as how they would see framing those types of things.
Director Ties, anything further?
No, that's good information. If staff feels like they have enough guidance with what we've got here, I'm okay with that.
Thank you. Director McMahon and then Director Lee.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to active transportation. While, you know, I'm completely good, given our budget situation with broadening where we have used gas tax funds, I think the intention, certainly in my area, was to develop an active transportation network. And a lot of it is already there. It's been done over the years, but I really want to make sure that the pieces that are missing get recognized and prioritized. I met with my APC on Monday night and we talked about active transportation, and I'm doing another community consultation next week on the same topic about, you know, what are the high value, low cost pieces of transportation that need to be put in place to have pedestrian and cycling routes connecting important destinations or school or getting people to the bus route. And really good conversation so far, by the way. So I would, that's a long way of saying that I would like to move that we add active transportation to 6.2.3B after critical infrastructure needs, comma, active transportation, comma, capacity building.
Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Seconded. Any further discussion on the recommendation on the floor? Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. Where would staff look to in a policy document that already exists to guide the active transportation needs? Is the integrated transportation study still valued? Where would staff look for guidance in an existing key plan?
Well, I think the transportation study was the most recent, and I think also there was a plan right before the Liberal government transitioned to the new government, and it was a plan called I think On the Move, and in that particular plan the Ministry of Transportation had actually identified active transportation networks that were a priority. And so we were moving towards, and I think this is still most certainly everybody's desire in the province, really, especially with the ABICC group, that's you know, how can we partner and leverage, but we have to understand each other's plans. So whether it's a rural areas plan that's already begun and we want to just complete it and enhance it. We don't really have any active transportation plans as an SCRD. That would be something that could be developed if desired.
All right, before we get to Director Lee, I've got a question on this. If we put active transportation in here as a specified item, what happens if the project areas or categories change under the Community Works Fund application or grant program?
We would have to change the policy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's up for renewal in a couple of years.
Thank you. Director Lee and then Director McMahon.
I got comments related to the motion and
Yes.
comments outside the motion. So I'll just make my comments related to the motion first.
Yes, please.
And that is under the 6.2.3. It says projects which address critical infrastructure needs. Is active transportation a critical infrastructure need? Probably is. It's probably already included, but I'd like to get an opinion on that one.
Tina, what would you say to that? Oh, or Dean?
Well, I can give you my opinion. So my opinion is such that critical infrastructure needs could be argued in many different senses. So, you know, I think what's intended by this and the spirit of it is our own critical infrastructure needs. So maintaining our existing assets. And of course, the whole spirit of the way gas tax was first introduced was to identify the infrastructure deficits within Canada, but to also ensure that we were ensuring clean water, reducing greenhouse gases, and those types of things. So in the next iteration, they kind of elaborated it to try to include more asset management related stuff. So that's the spirit with which the agreement was done. I would say that critical infrastructure that is not built yet, so new infrastructure, I'm not sure that would qualify as critical infrastructure, but it could be argued. So,
Okay, Dean?
I almost feel like the critical infrastructure, what the federal government is trying to say now is that if they were to say, look, these are the gas tax funds, if we were to look at it through our lens, what we think the highest and best use of spending these funds would be, communities should consider using these for their own critical infrastructure needs. When I look at active transportation networks, if I was to try to classify those, that's more strategic infrastructure. That's something that people have identified as a real opportunity. Maybe it's something that's missing that could enhance things on the Sunshine Coast and might be a really strong strategic investment. So one potential way to deal with something like active transportation networks in a way that doesn't require us to change the policy should a specific thing that we specified become not eligible, could be to have it as critical or strategic infrastructure needs. Because the rest of it talks about projects that appear eligible, those types of things. Maybe that covers off the same thing.
Okay. Director Lee, were you looking to speak to the same thing again? So we're on the recommendation at this point.
Yes. I was wondering if, in fact, this policy is set upon guidelines that UBC has given us, or are we setting this policy to reflect what the directors would like the gas tax money to be spent on?
Tina?
So in the last report, we gave some background, a little bit of where the policy was guided by. So it has been guided by the UBCM eligibility criteria. It's also been framed on, I think I received feedback from 5 regional districts that actually have a policy like this. The others didn't have one. So it's guided in that particular sense, but I think we also, what's included in here is somewhat our legislative framework that we have to kind of frame. So we have to have an existing service of the regional district, those types of things. So three pillars: UBCM, other policies that have been addressed, and our legislative framework.
Director Lee, did you have further follow-up?
Not on this particular motion.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
I just would be happier putting the active transportation in to recognize, the priority of the community. I realize that the federal government will undoubtedly revise their criteria at some time in the future. And at that time, we'll have to review this anyway. So if it happened that we couldn't spend it on active transportation, then we could take it out again.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions on the recommendation on the floor? And the recommendation is to add to 6.2.3 active transportation projects. See, Director Lee, your hand's up for the after this, correct? Okay. So this is voting electoral area directors only. All those in favor of the recommendation on the floor? Thank you, that passes. All right, any further comments or questions about the rest of the policy? Director, let's go to Director Lee and then we'll go back to Director McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. To me, the gas tax and the reason that we put it into each EA was to try and address the individual communities' priorities within certain guidelines such as this. This thing clearly says that our CFO will be the ones that have the ultimate say in what can be funded or not. But I think quite often the communities come to us as individual directors and bring high-value, low-cost projects. And these are often ones that are partnerships with community groups. And in fact, the community group will not participate unless it's on that project because they're uniquely placed to assist us with that. So you'll get things like a path, active transportation path, that all we got is build it, and they'll sign an agreement to pass it, maintain it, keep it up. And so we have no ongoing operations costs, which is, and in fact, they'll even put more capital in if needed, if something fails. So we can assign agreements like that. Somehow we need to get them into the hopper so that they're considered and they're documented correctly and worded correctly to be considered. And I don't see that process in this document. I was just wondering if I'm missing it somewhere or.
Director Lee, would that fit under 6.2.3D?
That's the type of projects, yes.
Right.
But if we go back, if we go to 7, responsibilities and procedures, there is no place that says an EA director and or a community group may approach the SCRD, and if the directors agree, staff will flush out the proposal. It doesn't say that in there.
Would that be in 6.2.5 then, where we call them eligible partners?
Yes. Except it doesn't say how it gets to that stage.
Okay. Tina, any input on how we could address this? This comes back to what Director Tighe was saying too, basically.
Well, and I think that's what, you know, I'm hearing there's a potential grant and aid related process. That's really what is both of those things are addressing. And so if there is a desire to bring back a proposal for a grant of assistance process, which would then be followed up by a policy procedure, then that's what staff would have to bring back.
Okay. Director Lee, did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, it's a little hard for me to actually follow the grant and aid process when In fact, this is like a one-time thing. It's going to disappear. And yet, ongoing, that process I just described happens regularly, whether it's an enhancement to a wastewater plant or an expansion of a water service area. Very often, those come to the area director and then are brought to staff, and they get kicked off. This one is probably a little stickier because they could be suggesting that this is the only source of funding, which is not necessary at all. But it's a good start, good place to start as well. So that's where I'm having trouble with the concept.
Okay, Director McMahon and then Director Toth.
Yeah, I actually agree with Director Lee that the part missing here is for the community to identify and bring projects forward that would then be evaluated for their feasibility by staff. You know, if they are, you know, good beneficial projects. My comment though was 7.1.3C. That sentence still doesn't make any sense. It says approve contribution agreements with nonprofit organizations received CWF monies. Something is wrong in there. We need a grammatical correction. Is that receiving CWF monies?
Who have received,
That could be it too.
or who will receive CWF monies? Because a contribution agreement would need to be signed prior to them receiving funds, correct?
Just looking for a grammatical rescue.
Tina, what would you like it to say?
Sorry, which point was it?
7.1.3 C.
Yeah, so that one there was one of the amendments out of the last review. So I think this, there was a past motion, so someone had suggested this one, but it's really just to recognize that if we do get into an agreement with a nonprofit through the regional district, that they would have to have an agreement with the regional district.
Right. What we're saying is the grammar in the sentence is not complete. There's something missing.
Yeah. So yeah, any approved contribution agreements with nonprofit organizations, approved for CWF monies.
I think what we're looking
Yeah.
at is,
So, right here it says the board's responsibility is to, so your responsibility as a board per a delegation bylaw is to potentially approve any contribution any agreements between them.
right. So what we're asking is, should it say approve contribution agreements with nonprofit organizations who will receive CWF monies?
Yes, that would make sense.
Okay. Perfect. Dean?
I can move that.
Just a clarification, if I could, Director Lee, is what you're suggesting as I read through the policy and I think of your example of how a not-for-profit group that might have a good idea gets it onto the work plan, basically is what you're asking. So we have a not-for-profit group that approaches you and they've got an idea for a park expansion or improvement within an existing park, let's say, and they're wondering if one, gas tax might be eligible for that, and if we were to use some gas taxes for that, what would that look like? And right now it would be an informal process of they talk to you, you talk to someone like me, we see if it fits within the plan for that park or service, and then that leads to some potential discussion with staff, which may lead at some point to that item coming up for, goes out to referral, including Shechelle. It comes up in front of the board and it ends up potentially becoming a thing on a work plan that has funding and an agreement and all these things that are in this proposed policy associated with it. if I'm understanding this correct, what you're curious about is what is the process? Is the informal process that currently exists now, completely informally and not written down, is that enough? Or is there some formality required around that process? And does that need to be in this policy?
Exactly.
So Director McMahon wants to make a recommendation first around this change, 7.1.3C, where it would say, instead of received, it will say will receive. And Director Ties is seconding that. Any further comments or questions on the recommendation on the floor? Director Toth, did you want to address this? Okay. All those in favor? Electoral areas. Thank you. That passes. All right. Now we'll go to Director Toth, and we're still looking at what you're talking about, Director Lee. Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. That's good, because my comments were back to the sort of things that Director Lee was talking about. Yes, I don't get to vote on this and I don't get to participate, but I just sort of wanted to flag that for directors. If you look at item 8.1 in the timelines, in order for projects to be included in the financial plan, proposals have to be presented prior to pre-budget. And if they've been received after that date, they'll only be considered if the project's considered an emergency. So if somebody came to Director Lee today with a great project idea to build a bridge over a creek somewhere and something, and gas tax were eligible, that would have to wait an entire year before it could come back. And I suppose my question is, would our community groups be interested in bringing back a project that might have a year plus lead time? Thinking about volunteer groups, when they get excited about a project, they want to get moving on it. And I wonder if there's any chances of sort of a mid-year review or process.
Who wants to speak to that? Tina?
So I think we're going to have to bring the policy back. I think we're going to have to bring back some options to allow for these questions, because I think that what we have to do as staff is, and Dean articulated it quite well, it's not the fact that the policy would preclude us from doing that, but perhaps what's missing is the procedure. So it's the mechanism. How can we do those types of things? How can we allow for it? And just so we can make sure that everybody understands the requirements as a local government that we can do those types of things. So my suggestion would be for us to bring something back to that effect, if that is the desire of the board.
Did you want to follow up on that? Go ahead, Director Lee, since you started this.
Could I make that motion?
Okay, that staff bring back a revised policy to incorporate a process whereby the community would have input or be able to bring projects forward, something like
Yes.
that? Okay. And I think part of that is going to be looking at the timing of when those would have to come forward in order to fit into, giving staff enough time to do the work prior to pre-budget, for example, making sure that they qualify, all those kinds of things.
And it fits into the manpower planning, because
Yes.
some of these
Yes.
projects might be manpower only and not capital. So
And a piece of this is that I think as directors, you're recognizing that this is a source of funding that could assist with some of the organizations in the community to move some projects forward, some potential projects forward, but they don't really know about it. And so you want to get the information out so that they could kind of have it in the back of their mind and have a way to potentially access the funding.
yes, I guess to my mind, the danger is that we're bringing this up in a specific area when in fact we probably should have had it, how to do it a long time ago. But anyways, better late than never.
Okay, so Director Lee is making a recommendation. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Speaking to the recommendation, Director McMahon.
Yes, in fact, Director Toth went exactly where I was going to go next, which was 9.1. One of the things, this policy doesn't give us the flexibility to respond to small opportunities, like putting in the pathway connecting Mahan Trail to Inglis in the town of Gibsons. That's half a block. And it's going to come up, and we want to be able to get on it and not have to go through some, incredibly long process. Also, if I look at the solar project that the association has brought forward, that they would like to move forward on the roof of the rec center. Well, we haven't seen a proposal as part of pre-budget, so that would nix it for another year. So we do need a somewhat more flexible way of addressing especially these high value, low cost, or quickly arising opportunities.
Emergent opportunities.
Emergent. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you,
Dean.
I wonder if we're talking almost about two different things. We're talking about one, we're talking about a gas tax policy, which I think pretty well covers off everything, especially with the inclusion of active transportation, let's say. The other one, though, isn't specific to gas tax. A great idea that a community group has that might be high value, low cost, that may be a partnership opportunity with the SCRD, is not necessarily linked only to gas tax funding. The question actually, I believe, is how do we work with our community partners to forward ideas that may have mutual benefit and get them onto the work plan and have staff analyze them and come forward with the budget proposal? So I almost feel like the gas tax policy itself, as with the suggested amendments, might be okay. But what we're actually talking about is a process or the mechanism that we can use to partner with community groups that have great ideas. Sometimes it's going to involve a link to the gas tax policy. Sometimes it's not. It's purely sweat equity. It's helping them navigate the referral process or whatever that is. And maybe we don't need to. Maybe it doesn't need to be connected to this policy. Maybe this policy is okay, but staff need to work on what the process is for these partnerships to be enabled and show up on a work plan.
Director McMahon, did you want to address that?
I think that's generally what we're looking at here. How do we get things into the process in a more formal way rather than the way that it's being done right now?
Okay. Director Hiltz, Director Lee, and then Director Pratt.
Thanks, Chair. If this policy has to go out and come back again, I'm wondering about the timelines for staff to act on the policy leading into round one. That's kind of to separate out these processes. Because for me, it's, as CAO McKinley is saying, there's this process, which is our strategic plan and continuous loading into the work plan and the annual budget process, opposed to this gas tax policy. I do see them as two separate pieces. And my concern about sending it back to staff to kind of bundle them together could affect the round one kind of timeline. And I'd be supportive of it if it didn't go in with the gas tax, I think, to keep them separate, to keep the gas tax policy moving forward to round one budget. That's particularly around the wastewater issue. So I do see them as two pieces. And the question, what would the impact of having it to go back, bundling them, and staff's ability to react to this policy in round one?
How would that impact staff's ability to act using gas tax funds in round one budget?
Well, I think staff are already working on identifying projects that either carry forward projects or so we're already doing that analysis to bring back different proposals for round one for funding. I don't think the policy would support some of that. The piece that would be missing would be any things that were not contemplated as part of budget. So I would, I know there's no particular motion about timelines, but I would see myself wanting to bring something back to the board for January CAS.
So in other words, you'd like to see this passed to enable staff to be able to implement this for round one budget?
Yes, that would be ideal. But again, our budget's not adopted until March 31st, Stu. So.
Right. Director Lee and then Director Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. First off, I agree that we need to do this so that we don't stop it from happening this year. And my second comment is that I think we're trying to remove stuff so it doesn't prevent that from happening, not that we're trying to define how it can happen. So I think it would be possible to make those changes and bring it back in a short order.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
Thank you. I'd agree with what the CAO had said regarding it's the two pieces and with what Director Helt said as well. I'm happy with where we're at right now with the policy, and then looking at I'm going to call it a community application piece beyond that, looking at that completely separately, because I think that's a larger conversation and a longer conversation. The gas tax, I'm happy with where we are right now. I'd be happy to pass it the way it's been edited a little bit right this morning, and but then look again at the community application piece and looking at the implications there, but looking at that completely separate from the gas tax policy, but with, obviously the funding sources could be gas tax. So
Okay.
that's where I'm at.
Perfect. Tara, could you read the recommendation that's on the floor so we know what we're actually dealing with here? And then the directors can look at how they'd like to vote on what we have and see if it fits what their direction is now looking like.
Thank you, Chair. That staff report to the January 2021 Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting with a revised draft federal gas tax community works fund policy, providing options and process to allow communities to provide input and submissions for projects.
Okay, Director McMahon.
On the one hand, I wish to move these things forward because gas tax is important right now. But if we pass the policy as it stands with section 8.1, that effectively nixes the solar project for the roof of the Gibson's Rec Center. And I've asked a number of questions about that and haven't had any response yet from staff as to where it stands and whether it's possible to do it or what's going on. So I would be reluctant to pass the policy as it stands right now.
Okay, so I think that's a separate issue from the recommendation on the floor at this point. The recommendation on the floor is basically saying, take this away and look at a public process to be able to access gas tax funds and come back.
And my only additional thought about that is, as long as our motion is broad enough, because it may be, as Dean suggested, that we need to separate our gas tax policy from our procedure for getting into the budget stream. So that might be, I'm happy if staff are going to work on that and come back. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so that's not the recommendation on the floor. Recommendation on the floor is that that be incorporated into the gas tax policy. So if directors are looking at having it be a separate process as to how the community gets, to come back with a process as to how the community gets into the project and budget timeline that's separate from funding from gas tax. Because the motion on the floor is, how do we get them into the process to get funded through gas tax? I think we're looking at something broader than that. Okay, so directors, any questions about the recommendation on the floor? All right, I'm going to look for a motion. Look for you to vote on the recommendation on the floor. Does anybody need it read first before you vote? You're all clear on what you're voting on? All right, all those in favor? Okay, we have 3, 4. All those opposed? And would you like that recorded? Yes, please. Okay, thank you. All right, so that recommendation is moving forward. At this point, we are not then adopting the policy as it's presented. Nothing further to do on Annex B. Director Lee.
Do we need another motion to cover what 2 directors are, I believe, uncomfortable with? And I believe the issue that they're uncomfortable with here is that if a project is sufficiently important, we should be able to, and in fact, can fit into a gas tax funding envelope where we have money and done that year. They'd like to be able to see it brought forward outside the budget process. In other words, basically any time in the cycle for us to consider whether we want to do it or not. I think that's the issue that the 2 directors were uncomfortable with in that last motion. So we could easily add that, I think, as a motion if that was required.
Okay, there are implications for that on work plans as well, right? And funding, potentially. Okay, Director McMahon?
I think we had said earlier that this would not necessarily be only gas tax, because there is at this point no process that I know of, no official process for community projects to come forward for consideration. It's not in there, and there's no process for. Also, the policy does not distinguish between small projects and large projects, which was the same problem I had with the MODI MOU, by the way. This policy calls for a detailed work plan for every project. And, if putting a load of crusher dust and a sign up needs a detailed work plan, that seems a bit silly to me. So I'm just going to assume that staff will use common sense when applying the policy to smaller projects. But we do need to be able to have some flexibility to meet opportunities as they arise, or community needs as they arise, and if they make sense within the context of our services and capabilities.
So would you like to see a recommendation that staff come forward with some kind of plan for how community initiatives can be brought to the board and potentially included in work plans and budgets?
Or maybe we need to have this discussion again, because I don't actually know historically how this has worked. I suspect it has been a highly informal process where somebody goes to Lori and says, hey, we have this thing we want to do. Get the SCRD to do this. And then, it goes through some wheels, but I don't actually know. I have not thoroughly had time to think this through.
Okay, so it sounds like we're maybe not ready to move something forward at this point and put it on a staff work plan. We do have a conversation coming up shortly about grant and aid. Perhaps we could add on a piece there, because that's where some of these other projects have potentially come forward and shown up that don't really fit that. And we're going to be looking at how do we create something there to deal with those. Dean, Tina, do you think that would kind of fit? It would also give directors a little more time to think about it.
I'm wondering, in some ways, what we're trying to figure out is articulating the process so people have a thorough understanding of how an idea moves forward through the system.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes these ideas are not going to lead to any kind of partnership with SCRD, but they may be directed to other potential opportunities. Sometimes they may involve some level of partnership or collaboration that has nothing to do with a monetary contribution, but has potentially staff time or even asset management implications. And sometimes it may directly connect to financial contributions or access to gas tax funding. So that's more of a procedure. We could look to articulate what that procedure is by doing some research into how what's this informal process look like? Does the informal process actually work if we actually articulated what it was and communicated it out to people so they knew it better? And then does that have to actually tie to the policy? Exactly. And so in some ways I feel like it's a separate beastie that we could work on to make it more clear how we partner with our community groups and how we identify what those opportunities are moving forward.
So how would we actually put that in a motion that staff could action?
We would need to research and come back to you with a report that potentially makes recommendations to articulate the process by which community project ideas move forward. That's probably a terrible motion wording, but it's basically the gist of it.
And Tara will fix it up, I'm sure. No pressure. All right, Director McMahon?
Yeah, and I just wanted to be clear that I would not want to put in place another parallel process like grant and aid, because we've got enough processes in my view. So thank you.
Okay, so would someone like to make that recommendation that was put forward? Moved by Director McMahon. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any further comments or questions on that?
Can I hear it again, please?
Sure. Tara.
Tara, did you clean up Dean's words?
Well, thank you, Chair. The staff report back to a future committee with recommendations to articulate a process for which community project ideas are considered and for work plans and budget discussions.
Everybody okay with that wording? I'm seeing nods. All right. All those in favor? Thank you. That passes. All right. Anything else with regard to this, Director Lee?
Just before we leave, because our two representatives from municipalities haven't had an opportunity to weigh in, I'd be curious if you have something like this in your areas.
Bill, do you want to go ahead and I'll think about what happens with us?
Our policy relative to gas tax is pretty much in line with UBCM guidelines. So that, I mean, what I see you trying to accomplish here is looking for funding mechanisms to support community initiatives as they might be driven by the community. And those include gas tax, but they're not exclusive of gas tax. I mean, you've got iced tea, you've got different projects that come online. And there's all sorts of ways to say, here, there's a good project. How can we make this project work? What are the different pockets of money that we should be accessing to get a project together? In some sense, I don't think we should encourage the community to hold on to projects or to come up with them last minute. I think there should be a kind of a, hey, community, we're coming into our budget process in 3 months' time. Do you have any projects that you think should be considered in the next year's budget? And they be given some thought. We have enough things that will come to the table during the course of a year that we have no control over that will task staff. So I just think that gas tax is one mechanism for funding a project, provided it meets the criteria. But you may look at that and say, that didn't quite fit, so let's go over to iced tea. Could work. Let's go over to other funding sources. And there's always other grants coming on. So our gas tax is relative to pretty much strictly, what does the UBCM agreement say, and does it fit? No matter what the project is, and no matter where the project comes from.
Yeah, Director Toth, and then I'll throw a few words in.
I basically just wanted to chime in with what has come to be my understanding at the District of Seashell, where we use most of our gas tax for our paving program, as per the UBCM sort of guidelines, and the rest of it tends to be used for safety improvements, crosswalks, things of that nature. Again, all per the UBCM. I don't think we've got a separate gas tax policy. I think we just use the UBCM guidelines.
With regards to how do community groups or, whatever, come forward and get something on in our work plan and on our budget, part of our process at the District of Seashell is during the time when staff are looking at, their areas and their projects and things they need to bring forward, our senior team also meets with each community association and other groups who want to come, like Downtown Business Association, for example. They meet with them and get a list of projects that they see they would like to have move forward. And I mean, we just did this last night. During our pre-budget, we start, there's a list. This is what the East Corpus Bay Community Association has asked for. This is what the Downtown Business Association has asked for. And then we can go through there and say, which of these do we want more information on? Which, and staff can weigh in and say, well, this one, maybe doesn't fit because of this or that or whatever. So there's a back and forth conversation about some of those at that point. As well, during the year, we do get community groups who come forward with various projects. A lot of times they'll come to a counselor or come to me or come to staff. And then we will look at that. Is this something that needs to move forward quickly? Do we have any money that's available to do that? Is there any other funding opportunity they have access to or could potentially have access to we can support them with, right? But they tend to get lesser priority because the work plan is already set out for staff for the year. So those tend to be smaller projects. The bigger ones, we actually go out and solicit, ideas from them. Could be, we want a light on a certain crosswalk or something, one of those flickering lights. We've had trails suggested. There's a whole list. If you look at our budget from last night, there's a whole list of various things that the community associations came forward with. Okay, Director McMahon?
I'm just going to say that it's a bit different in the rural areas because traditionally the liaison with all the community associations is the rural directors. So it tends to be us that go out to the community and then we try to funnel projects up through the system. But it is, I think, a little mysterious for the public to figure this out.
Right, but so we've actually formalized that and said in the fall, sometime between September and December, or end of November, senior staff will meet with community associations. It's just part of our process. So maybe as electoral area directors, it's something simple like, you know, in June, you say, okay, we're going to be talking about pre-budget coming up. So when we meet in July, if you meet in the summer or whatever time frame, we want you to have come to be able to come to us with your list of projects that you think we as a regional district need to undertake in our community. Yeah,
That's
so
what they pay me, the $26.70 for.
I know, but it would then be up to that to be funneled to staff to, you know, look at them and say, no, these aren't right. But it kind of gets them in that process, and that could be part of the conversation. Dean?
Yeah, and I think if you think about it, some of the conversations staff have had in your area, Director Lee, and even recently the meeting in your area, Director Ties, we have almost a procedure, like we have a methodology, we almost have a procedure. We have to articulate it, communicate it, potentially formalize it, make sure that we put some benchmarks in for around timing, and it should not be that challenging to come up with something that works.
No, that's right. All right. Looks like we're now, do we have a recommendation on the floor? Did we vote on it? We voted on the previous one. Okay, good. Any other questions or comments about the gas tax funds or this whole process we've been talking about? Okay, what I'd like to do is get through items 5 and 6 and then take a break because we're going to be kind of shifting direction at that point. All right. So let's look at Annex C 2021 meeting schedule.
Thank you, Chair. The schedule of meetings for SCRD board and board committees is adopted annually. Staff have proposed a 2021 meeting schedule for the committee's consideration. Changes to the meeting schedule can be made throughout the year by resolution or in alignment with the board procedures bylaw.
Thank you. Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to flag there that the real big change is swapping PCD with infrastructure services there. And I note in the report it specifies to better accommodate operational needs related to timelines. And it's totally okay for a staff to say that these meetings run long every time. And I do appreciate the clear timeline outside of that meeting. So I'm happy to move the recommendation as presented.
All right, is there a seconder? Seconded. And then Director McMahon.
Sure, I'm just wondering if staff were considering going back to the previous structure where there was a community services meeting separate from planning, because we're going to have a new GM.
And yeah, Sherry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Per the Local Government Act, if we were to establish a new standing committee, that would be at the discretion of the board chair. And so that can be done at any time, and at that time we would add it to the calendar.
Right, and as Sherry said, if sometime in the new year we need to change the calendar, we can do that. Director Ties.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if any thought has been given to putting the TAC and the policing and public safety committee on not on the same Thursday, but to have them go on different days, just so that it seems we always seem to be rushed to try to finish one to make it to the other, and I think maybe it might be easier just to put them on different Thursdays.
Director Beamish and then Director Pratt.
My question was also around those two committees, and I wasn't on the board this last year, but given the numbers of issues that are coming up in our communities around policing and public safety, as well as transportation, is quarterly frequently enough for those meetings, or bi-monthly make more sense to stay on top of issues or to deal with issues? It's just a thought. I certainly think we have issues around those particular topics that we hold for a quarter. It takes quite a bit of time.
Okay, follow up on that point with Sherry. I think we've got two issues here, right? One is the calendar, one is the terms of reference for the committees. Because the terms of reference indicate the frequency of meetings, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And we can amend those terms of reference per any amendments that are made to the schedule. And so that's what I also wanted to point out, that any amendments that are made today by the board, we will adjust the terms of reference accordingly. And I'll just give a bit of context as to why policing and TAC have traditionally been held on the same day, and that was back in the day when we did in-person meetings. A lot of the participants in those committees were attending both, so it was convenient to have them here at that time and schedule them back to back.
Thank you. Okay, so I've made a note of that. We'll come back to that piece, see if there's anything else. Director Pratt?
Thank you. The corporate officer answered one of the things I was going to say regarding TAC and policing have typically always had a number of the same attendees or the same members on both. I would ask that TAC maybe get moved to 3:30 instead of 3:15, just because of that that time crunch that we're having. There's also, in response to what Director Beamish was saying about the number of issues, there's also, on the other side of that, there's been a little bit of a conversation about having maybe these committees, rather than being separate committees, be standing reports potentially within one of our standing committees. But as already mentioned, there are other members of the community that do come into both of these committees. So, I mean, I think that's for further discussion in the new year around these committees. I don't want to get hung up on that today, but I would ask that the time for Transportation Advisory Committee get moved to 3:30.
Okay, Director McMahon. So that's seconded. Okay. So that is a recommendation. I think we're going to see if we also want to address Director Beamish's comment about more frequent meetings. So we could tie those together, I think, into one recommendation, if that's the direction we want to go. Director McMahon? Oh, sorry, you're still muted.
This is a broader conversation about our committees that we do need to have. I will say that transportation runs late almost always, because among other things, we have a roundtable and the allotted time is rarely sufficient. So just for staff's, information, I think that I agree with Director Beamish that we should look at maybe putting TAC and policing on different days, because it becomes a kind of a marathon afternoon, especially if we aren't starting until 2 o'clock.
Okay. So if we look at the calendar right now, we've got 2nd and 4th Thursday afternoons, we have board, which would leave 1st and 3rd potentially to be the transportation and policing. Director McMahon?
I'd be okay to pass what we've got with the amendment moved by Director Pratt, just to get the process moving. And then we can come back to it later if we need to when we have our discussion about committees. Director
Beamish, are you okay with that at this point? Okay. So there's a recommendation on the floor that we change the time of the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting to 3:30 p.m. And that's been seconded. And this would be all directors. All those in favor? Thank you. Anything else? All right, so there's a recommendation on page 41 that the 2021 meeting schedule be considered for adoption as amended. Director Pratt, first of all, okay.
Just quickly first, if I haven't spoken to you as a director yet, I will speak to you soon about committee appointments, because those will be coming up next month on December the 10th at board. Okay. And I'm happy to move the recommendations.
All right. Is there
as amended?
Seconder for the recommendation, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on to item 6. Annex D, sorry. And Tina or Valerie? Valerie showed up. Maybe it's Valerie who's speaking to this.
Thank you, Chair. You'll see the insurance report for our dues for next year for 2021. You'll notice that there's actually been an increase in insurance rate quite substantially. The reason why, I just want to talk really quickly about that, is in 2019, the end of 2018, early 2019, we started seeing what's called a hard market happen. And these are claims that arise in frequency and severity with higher payouts. Years of premium reductions and heavy losses are making companies unprofitable for the insurance agencies. Various financial crises, along with the pandemic, have virtually eliminated interest gains from stock bonds. So we will see across all insurance, you'll notice the personal insurance, home insurance, that there has been a substantial increase, and it will continue to grow next year as a result, especially because of COVID and environmental changes. They say in the market last year, $1.3 billion in Canada was spent on natural disaster recovery from claims. So unfortunately, this will be a trend that we will see. Even Aon usually gives a dividends, and not Aon, MIABC, and this year they did not because of the volatile market that we're seeing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm not surprised our insurance is going up, but I did want to nitpick because on page 57, it says that our MIA is increasing 14%, but when I did the math, an increase of $37,632 from $82,368 is a 46% increase, which is depressing, but there's really nothing we can do about it.
Thank you. I had a question on page 57 where it talks about Aon. It says that they covered general liability insurance. And if I go back to 56, we're saying in our recommendation that we have liability insurance from MIA. So could you explain the difference between the two liability insurances from the two different companies?
Sorry, had to see my unmute button. Thank you for the question. Yes, so the Aon liability program covers instructors insurance, liability, as well as business interruption liability. So it's a commercial general liability for the instructors and business interruption, where Aon covers the liability for elected officials, staff, volunteers, the volunteer firefighters, associate members, building inspectors, etc. Those type of items. So that's the difference.
Okay, thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, my question was on page 57, the casual legal service. Sounds like an awesome program. And I guess I would like to see more use of it rather than less use of it. For a question such as, can you park a RV on the side of a right of way on Payne Road? Like, is there ways for directors to kind of funnel through this process to deal with these questions? I guess so. It's how to get into this stream of asking casual legal questions. I guess, is it possible? What's the procedure?
That might be a Dean question.
I'll look for some help from Tina on this one as well. But essentially, that isn't available for directors to just phone up and ask those types of casual questions through that mechanism. Have I got that right, Tina?
Well, I think maybe a little differently. If any area director has any concerns regarding bylaws, etc., then most certainly that's the role of the CAO, is to make sure they hear that, and then it's the role of staff to then ask. essentially that's sort of the process. And the process is such, so we also protect the interest of both the director and the regional district to ensure we're compliant with things. So we, it's to protect the director. You wouldn't want to be phoning legal. I think that's not sure that's a practice you'd want to endeavor, but yeah.
So we
The
continue.
answer is it's for staff.
We'd continue on with the same mechanism of informing the CAO, who can either filter it through staff or through these other channels.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I was going to move the recommendations on page 56.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded. All right. Director Beamish, are you speaking to the recommendation or should we come back to you? Oh, you're still muted.
Mute me. Okay, it would be to the recommendation. It's just a thought when I see this and see these costs and see that we are as municipalities also going to be duplicating these costs. Is there an overlap here? Are we paying? Does the regional district paying for coverage that the municipality already has? As a mayor of the municipality, I will be covered by MIA through the municipality, through any capacity that I do as a mayor. So does the SCRD need to cover me additionally? Or are there areas of savings that can be looked at and say, well, I come to the table with insurance, but I mean, I'm just wondering where else that insurance impacts.
Tina? I personally, I think what you're going to find is we have two different roles, first of all. And then the other piece is, this is a blanket policy. Taking one or two people out probably isn't going to impact our premium that much.
Well,
Tina?
jurisdictionally, I wonder if it takes one or two people out or if it takes the municipality out.
Right. Okay.
And we cover by our own insurance.
Tina?
No, because this covers the regional district's assets, the regional district's volunteers and services.
Yeah.
So there isn't any overlap in
Okay.
that context of things. The only overlap would be, like you said, the directors, but you play a role as a director at the municipal level, and then it's to cover your role as the SCRD representative.
Okay. No, just looking to save money, that's all.
All right, there's a recommendation on the floor that we approve the recommendations on page 56. And this is voting all directors. All those in favor? Thank you. All right, we're going to take a break here. It is 11:18. Do we need 10 minutes? 10 minutes. All right. Let's make it 11:30. We'll be back at 11:30. See you then. Thank you. Welcome back to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, November 26th. Now, before we move into the rest of the items on our agenda, we had a conversation at our agenda review meeting, and so I'd like to make just a few comments. One of the goals in our strategic plan is asset stewardship. So to that end, staff have done a lot of public consultation out in the community with regards to wastewater and water. And then we were presented with all of the potential budget items at pre-budget. All of the items before us now, 7 through 13, have 7 through 13. It's requested that they go to board this afternoon. So I know there is a little bit of leeway in that, but we are looking to have these approved by the end of December in order to meet the deadlines for fees and rates that need to go forward in budget for next year and our legislative timelines. Inside of the budget conversation that we're having today, we need to recognize the work that staff have done, the decisions that we've made, and staff have come to us with recommendations based on the best information they have to date. At this point, the decision before us is a political decision, because whatever decisions we make, we need to stand behind in the community. We know that some of the decisions we make around rate increases are not popular in the community. And in fact, we will have some of the community members who will not want these to happen at all. We are looking to put these areas, the water, wastewater, etc., in a place where we're moving towards a more stable financial platform. So that's the context I want you to look at and come at these decisions when we look at deliberations. And I know you're going to have other points to put forward. Okay. So do we want to weigh in? Let's move to item number 7, Annex E, and we're going to have Kyle give us a brief intro.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the introduction. In late 2017, staff began an internal service review of the SCRD's 15 wastewater services. Before I start, is my volume okay? Okay. Since that time, there's been an extensive analysis, including several rounds of public engagement. We had a considerable amount of dialogue and feedback from the residents. This process aligns with the board's strategic focus area of ensuring asset stewardship, communication, and engagement, as you touched on there. The process included the composition of individual asset management plans for the 15 wastewater services. Initially, we conducted 5 in-person public engagement sessions to each of the rural areas, and this helped us deliver a high-level understanding of the initial results of our findings. A rate review was presented to the board in January of this year that recommended user rates be adjusted such that they fully fund the operational costs. At that time, minimal adjustments were recommended for frontage fees until further public engagement could be conducted. And this was to ensure that users were informed of the rationale behind the proposed frontage fee structures and that they had the sufficient opportunity to provide feedback. Obviously, our plan was a little bit impacted by the pandemic, but we still managed to host 15 individual sessions, one for each wastewater service. I saw many of the board members at these sessions. We offered over 30 hours of time to residents to share their concerns and ask questions regarding the capital funding of each wastewater service. It's difficult to fully gauge participation as we offered it over YouTube and Zoom. On Zoom, participation in these meetings was found to vary greatly. Some services utilized the full 2 hours and then some, and others had 0 questions at the time of the presentation regarding the topics. Several resident groups communicated concern regarding the escalation of the cost for the service. They questioned the rationale driving the increases and the equity of these increases, current users versus future users. On the flip side of that, we had a considerable amount of feedback as well, indicating support for the increases and expressing concern that action had not been taken earlier. As this report covers 15 unique services, each one has different financial challenges and needs. In an ideal situation, frontage fees would rise at the same rate as inflation so as to create a consistent cost for the service over time. Since long-term capital planning has not been implemented in the past to a very robust degree, it is acknowledged that an incremental approach towards a more financially sustainable funding strategy is required. So working towards a sustainable frontage fee is necessary before it is possible to implement a steady inflation-pegged annual increase, as is typical with these systems accounting for life cycle costing. The recommendations made by this report is an attempt to balance the concerns that we heard from the residents, the financial uncertainty of the present time, with the clear need to raise revenue to avoid a future scenario where the cost of providing the services is dictated by extreme debt associated with infrastructure replacement. At this time, I'll pass it back to everyone for questions, and hopefully I can answer them.
Thank you, Director McMahon.
Okay, I'm looking at table 16, and I'm just going to speak to my area, which is Wood Creek and Sunnyside. I'm happy with this recommendation for this year. Going forward, I feel that we need to have more conversation about the frontage fees, because we don't in fact have a policy about how much reserves are sufficient. And despite efforts on the part of staff, I really don't feel that people in my two services fully understand the financial implications. And then with Sunnyside in particular, there's a lot of information missing that we don't have yet. We will, hopefully maybe next year or the year after, have a much better picture of the situation there. So as an interim step, I'm happy with this, but I sure wouldn't be happy going forward more than 1 year at a time right now.
Thank you, Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. On the same vein, the Roberts Creek co-housing, which is the only wastewater service in Roberts Creek, has indicated to me, and I believe to staff as well, as to which option they would like, or which scenario, which is scenario 1. And I can't speak for any of the others, but they would like to go ahead with that scenario. And so I'm happy with these recommendations at this point in time.
Okay, so just for the committee's information, on page 70, table 16, all in that table are scenario 1. All right, Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually just moving to that page to see what you were referring to there. I have, I believe it's 9 of the plants in my area total. And while I'm comfortable, or at least more comfortable with the user fees, because those are something we have to do to keep the lights on. There is a couple of the plants I do question, but I believe that's the next report to talk about.
So this report, number 7, Annex E, is the capital. This is the frontage fee.
This is strictly the frontage fees, yes.
Yes, yes. The next one is the user fees.
Yes. The reason I mention it is that some of my plants are not built out, and therefore you have things like 8 users out of 40, 40 serviced, and those 8 users are being asked to pay the usage. And a very high chunk of the usage. And that's not a fair way to do that, in my opinion. But anyways, I'd really like to start by rereading what I read earlier, and that's from one of my constituents here. If fees rises as projected to $2,400 in 2021, that would become our second largest annual household expense, second only to food. It represents close to 5% of our total income. The fee we paid in 2020 was already higher than our property tax bill. That's the impact that this wastewater is having on a lot of the constituents here in Pender, and quite a few of them actually, because we have the largest number. And right now, we've asked for an advisory group to be formed to talk about this, but it didn't happen. Each area since then has formed what I call their own advisory group, and they're lobbying me extensively on the capital side. They're very confused about the capital planning. They're confused about their options. They're not happy paying ahead of time for someone else's future plan long after they're dead and gone. Many prefer to save a little seed money and use a one-time levy option, which allows them to pay for what they're using and control their own finances. And they're saying the consultation was unsatisfactory and didn't give it the attention it deserved. It's a bigger hit on the individual pocketbook than regional water, but we didn't respond accordingly. They're saying they didn't have time to review the agenda ahead of time. We mixed O&M issues with capital issues, which confused the hell out of them. And COVID meetings were new, and people did not feel comfortable participating. And the video recording part actually chased them off. So in other words, we didn't have the right format. I really think on the capital side that we do need a plan. Capital planning by its nature is a long-term commitment. There's no need to hit people hard while we're in a COVID economy. We should do very minimal on the capital side in 2021 and get our planning completed and get our consultation completed, get our plan completed, and then go forward with that aspect of it. So for 2021, I would propose that we have a quick look at the capital side again. There is some parts of the capital side that we have no control over because the plants have failed or are going to fail real shortly, and the users are going to have to pay a huge chunk to replace that plant. There's no time for planning for those. But the other ones where we're looking 20 and 30 years down the road, we have time to understand it ourselves, understand the policy we want to go forward on the total capital planning and all the other stuff we're going to look at, because that's what this is doing. We're really not just talking wastewater here. We're talking about all future capital planning. And the policy we use here will carry forward forever. I don't think now is the time to jump into this capital part. So I'd be interested what other people say, but my first inclination is to take it easy on the capital side. Give a minimal increase only, $50 or something if that's necessary. I'm not even sure it makes a difference in 1 year anyways. And get the recommendation, come back to us. And the solution, I got suggestions for that. The consultation needs to continue. It's like saying we've had 2 consultations on regional water and that's all we're going to talk to them about. How would that fit with you guys? And that's what's happening with the wastewater. And the two consultations we had didn't just talk capital, it talked O&M as well. So I think we need to continue with the consultation. We need to do it on the individual plant user schedule. We need to involve the appropriate directors and senior management on the stage. We need to show some respect for our customers. We need to ensure that the Zoom formats are understood and all participants are on the panel. No recordings. This is a private discussion between users of the plant. We need after meeting minutes posted, and we need wrap-up meetings held prior to implementation. So if you think I'm a little unhappy, yes. Thank you.
Okay, so before we go to the other directors, just some clarification for me. The recommendation on page 70 with regards to your plants or the plants in your area, are you looking to not approve those today and have some further consultation, or are you okay with what they propose now and then further consultation before other rates go forward in other years? Do you want to just sit with that for a minute and look at it, and I'll go to the other directors and I'll come back to you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is one of those things for me is it's you can't just keep hoping that miracle money will show up and these will be fixed in the long term. We got to make decisions. So there was no one from Langdale has come up with a miracle solution for me as an alternative. So I'm accepting staff's recommendations at the point is where I am. The piece that I am mostly interested in is the communication strategy. And I agree that over the years, the communication of how the efficiency of the plants, how they've been run, and the accountability has been lacking to the, I'm going to call them almost the owners of, I guess they are the owners in some ways of these plants, and the various mechanisms. And in the variance reports in the next report, it has some potential. But for me, one of the principal documents will be the 2021-2025 financial plan, which all these services are listed. And there's usually a lot of white space in that document for ways to put in some more information about the financials. But the things that people were saying is they want to see what this is going to cost us in the years ahead, so we can plan accordingly our lives to save the money and decide if they want to continue to live in those particular properties, which are the value is tied with the wastewater plants. Can't have one without the other. So it's working for me at this point. It's a shock. There's no getting around the shock value of it. And it's this ongoing communication to the people who are paying for the services. That's where, and the efficiency of the management of the services and the accountability back to people. So those are my comments on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pratt.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. For myself, having just had a conversation last night with one of the service areas, the Square Bay area, I'm actually not comfortable moving these recommendations forward today. I need to go back to a couple of the other areas and speak with them directly. Square Bay themselves are really not comfortable. The entire around the philosophy of what we're moving to with asset management and stewardship. It's they've had a significant increase there with the current with the recent rebuild of the plant there, for want of better terminology, but they're really not comfortable and not happy with this increase into 2021. And for me, I need to take a pause. And I know I've also received feedback from one or two of the other service areas that one service area is not comfortable with it. The other service areas, yeah, go ahead. So for me personally, I need to take a pause and go and cycle back to my service areas, as they are the ones that are looking at these frontage fees and the capital planning moving ahead. Asset management and stewardship it's a new it's relatively new in the local government sphere. It's even newer for our residents. It's taking us time to wrap around it. We know we have thousands of miles of pipes and infrastructure, millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure within our regional district that has to be looked after. But our residents need to be able to understand and ask questions about it. And we need to be able to have, continue to have candid conversations. And I appreciate how much time and effort our staff has put into this. I sat on a number of the Zoom consultations with the wastewater plants, and in a couple of areas, and I know that residents are struggling to understand, and as we're trying to wrap our heads around it as directors as well. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Director Lee, I'm coming back to you.
I'm sorry, I forgot to put my hand down. I would like to hear what on directors.
Director Ties, okay, Director Ties.
Yeah, thank you. I am wondering, it seems that there's varying levels of comfort with the recommendations, and it depends on, which area you're in, what the hits are, and what your level of understanding is of the whole affair. So I'm wondering if we can identify or move ahead with some and not with others. Is that a possibility, staff?
Tina?
Yes. One suggestion would be to...
Tina, your sound is really kind of weird.
Something very weird happened to your sound.
Let me just see if I can just connect from my headphones.
Have you been trying helium by chance?
Oh, really? Okay.
That's better.
There we go. There we go. Helium's worn off.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So one alternative would be to go through the schedule, table 16, and to go one by one. That would be one alternative. Another alternative would be to put forward, further consideration to come back. But I think there's clear direction that some have some comfort to move ahead, and some have some ideas about what they'd like to put forward. So my suggestion would be to maybe go through each of the local service areas and give direction.
Thank you. So far I have Wood Creek, Sunnyside, Roberts Creek, and Langdale that have indicated they're okay. Are there others? Director Lee, Director Pratt, are there some in your areas that you're okay with moving forward as they are?
I have been trying quite desperately to understand each of the 9 plants. It's a very complicated scenario. Each one's different. Mm-hmm. And I really do need staff assistance in going through them and understanding them one at a time, because there's probably some that are okay and some that are not. But I'm not sure what the question actually is. Is the question that we're okay with the 2021
yes.
Proposal?
Yes.
And we're not committing to the next 5 years. Is that the question?
That's the question.
That's a different question.
I think it's been made pretty clear that ongoing, like this is one step, and that there needs to be further consultation, further work done by staff, engaging with the community before we commit to a longer term plan.
Yes, I hope I didn't come across too harshly, because staff has done an excellent job in gathering data. They've done an excellent job in trying to explain to everybody in a difficult time. And we give them a very, very complicated task, and they did very well at it. They did so well that they alarmed everybody, which I think is probably the fact that they did explain it quite well. But we need time to digest. We need time to satisfy. Everybody needs time to reach a conclusion, and you generally do that on your own time, providing that the information's there.
So would you be okay with the fees as proposed for 2021?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Director Pratt.
So I'm really clear on where the Square Bay community is at, and they are not supportive of a frontage fee increase for next year, or for 2021, and they made that very clear last night when we spoke with them. So I'm not prepared to. I've only heard from one member of the Curran Road community, and only a couple from the Jolly Roger Secret Cove area. So for me, and I'm really sorry to hold this up, but I'm not actually prepared to move any of mine forward at this particular time. I need to circle back. That's where I'm at.
Okay, so is Secret Cove is one of yours as well?
Secret Cove, Jolly Roger, Square Bay, and Curran are all mine.
Okay, are you okay with moving Secret Cove forward, or do you want to hold off on that one as well?
I am. I need, if you want to continue through the speakers list, I need a minute.
You're it.
I see Andres and Len on there.
Yeah, Director Ties and then Director Lee.
Yeah, I think it's, I want to make sure that both staff time is used efficiently, as well as giving those people that are ready and willing to move ahead the opportunity to start paying into their service now, rather than waiting for even longer and then having to pay more in the end. You know, it's in the case of Roberts Creek Co-housing, they're willing to move ahead with scenario one, and it doesn't sound like they need any more consultation. So I don't want to make it so that staff has to go and waste everybody's time not trying to make sure that everybody's happy when there's varying levels of comfort. So I just want to make sure that our recommendations coming out of the meeting today get to the point where those that want to go ahead and are comfortable with it at this point can, and then that those that need more, that staff then engage with those folks.
Thank you. Director Lee?
I was just reviewing my notes, and in fact, I have to withdraw my agreement.
Okay.
I have some that are status quo, like Canoe Road, and those can't change. So there is a couple that I'm comfortable going ahead with, but there's a lot that I'm not comfortable going ahead with. I would like to pause and take the time to look at each one of my plants in turn, and consult with the owners of those plants to see what they would like to do. There's no doubt that they're going to have to pay because they own the plant. The question is only, when does it start and how much is it? And I need a pause and think about that.
Okay. So I'm going to look to corporate officer and Tina around timing for an additional meeting. So if we do not move these forward now, we know that we need to adopt these by the end of December. Does that mean we need to have a committee meeting and a board meeting in order to move them forward, or would they go directly to board and we could just have a special board meeting to deal with them?
Thank you, Chair. My recommendation would be that we look to schedule a special board meeting, and if the goal is to have them adopted, the rates adopted in the bylaw by December 31st, there's limited opportunity to do that, but we do potentially have some time on December 3rd to follow the special CAS meeting with a special board meeting. I'd like the CFO to weigh in on that as well, please.
I guess the other piece is, would there be sufficient time to have the consultation that Director Lee and Director Pratt are looking for in order to be comfortable to move these forward prior to that? Dean?
I think that would depend somewhat on the level of consultation that's being requested. Certainly, to sort of follow up on some of Director Lee's comments before, a tremendous amount of effort and time has gone into trying to provide information and do the research that's culminated in these reports going out, including a really good opportunity to have a good conversation with the president of Square Bay last night. In no way was the conversation intended to be over. It's going to be an ongoing conversation as we continue to move forward with these. If there is something we can do to help Director Lee and Director Pratt and their residents feel more comfortable with the rates proposed this year, recognizing that this will be an ongoing conversation for a long time forward, we're happy to try to make something work that fits with everyone's time.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back. Sherry, you indicated December 3rd, so that's 1 week from today. Okay. Director Pratt?
Thanks, and that gives me more than enough time because I wanted to circle back to speak with Square Bay residents, as well as just follow up with my other residents too. And I'd rather ensure that I'm getting the full picture from them and comfort level before going forward. And I recognize and appreciate, as I said, like, I mean, I attended a lot of hours of meetings with Kyle, and I know, like, I know there's some resident comfort level, and I want to be sure that I've circled back to that before I go forward.
Thank you. Director McMahon and then Director Lee.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having the opportunity to consult my folks too. They know that this is coming because both these treatment plants are in trouble. But at the same time, it would be nice for me to have a little bit more time to just get to them and have them get back to me. Thanks.
Okay, Director Lee.
Yes, I'm comfortable with the time frame that you proposed. We have everybody's attention, so it should be, as long as, and when I say that, I know that staff has been supporting me, and I'm comfortable they will continue to do that during this time period. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so it looks like we would want to defer this report to a future special corporate administrative services committee meeting on December 3rd. Is that the recommendation that you'd be looking for, Sherry?
Thank you, Chair. I think if the intention is to adopt the rate amendments and bring the bylaws forward for readings on December 10th, ideally, it would be a special board meeting, and the decision would be made at that special board meeting.
On the 3rd?
Correct.
Okay. So we'd be looking for a motion to defer this report to a special board meeting to be held on December 3rd. Remco has his hand, sorry. Yeah, Remco has his hand up. Yeah. Go ahead, Remco.
This is not related to the timing of the meeting. So
okay, so we'll come back to you then. Okay.
Then I would make that motion then.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. All right, and this is electoral area directors only. Any further comments or questions on the recommendation on the floor? All those in favor? Thank you. All right, Remco, over to you.
thank you. The report indicates that for several plants, there might be some expenditures required in the near future, in upcoming years. If there is a desire by any of the directors to hear more what those could be, staff are there to support in upcoming days. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions on this report? We will move on to Annex F. This is the wastewater user fee review. Kyle, did you want to do an introduction to this one?
Yep, thank you, Chair. Similar to the previous report, this work is the culmination of several years of effort. This report summarizes operational budgets for each wastewater service and recommends adjustments to user fees that reflect the increased cost of providing that service. Most notably, the fees associated with tank pump outs have increased by 250%. Other adjustments relate to the allocation of support services, which is a delayed response to last year's budget adjustments, as well as an inflationary increase in the cost of providing the service. I do want to note that this review occurred less than a year after a significant adjustment in the structure of user fee allocation, where we moved away from frontage fees subsidized in operational budgets. So there, it's a back-to-back set of increases here. It makes it difficult with the short amount of time to review the budgets and the user fees to capture the full picture of the efficacy of these rate structures. Some ongoing staff and vacancies have accelerated anticipated contributions to reserve funds. And at the same time, as Remco just mentioned, some work has occurred since the publishing of this report that has consumed the remaining budgets for some service areas. So the recommended adjustments are part of an effort to balance establish a balanced and sustainable user fee structure for these services. And on a final note, I'd like to thank the keen eyes of Director Lee for drawing my attention to a typo in the report last night. In Table 2, Lily Lake 2020 service fees were incorrect. They should read $640.69. The adjustment is based on the increases, so that is correct. Subsequently, the 2021 user fees for Lily Lake should read $701.37. This has already been passed to Tara, who's making quick work of amending the report here.
Thank you. All right, directors. Director McMahon.
I look forward at a future time to a discussion about whether we should be taking on any of these wastewater treatment plants, because at this point, it's becoming a lot more expensive for homes to be on a wastewater plant than to have conventional septic. Because I know what it costs me for a pump out and how often I have to do that. And if these plants are simply not sustainable for residents, then we sure shouldn't be putting in more of them. Just my opinion.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, sure. Yeah, just a question on the, it's called increases to annual pumping fees. This is on page 122. I'm just wondering, pumping fee seems to be, you got a truck, you suck it out and you dump it at a certain volume. So proportionally, it would seem like the Langdale seems to be kind of has a higher pumping rate proportionally to the number of users. So is there anything special about it? Like Libe, yeah, so I just details on how that annual pumping fee is calculated.
Staff?
Thank you. Thank you, Director. I will take a first crack at the answer, and our manager of utilities can always add details that are missing. The pumping rates, the pumping costs are determined by not only the tracking, but also the number of pump outs. And even though Langdale might have a smaller population, the number of required pump outs at the moment is such that still relatively more pump outs are required than others, and in combination with longer hauling distance.
And if I can make a few comments, Langdale's an example where we take out multiple loads in one day. The numbers that the adjustment numbers are relative to the cost increase for dumping the effluent. Not there's no increase so far with trucking costs. It's just related to 6 loads and this much of an increase to dump it, and those are the numbers you're seeing in here.
I'm going to address the 260% increase that it indicates on page 121. Part of the work that we've been doing in the District of Sechelt is the same as what's been going on at the Regional District, where we've been looking at actually separating costs for the various facilities, because we have people in the District of Sechelt who pay a sewer fee to maintain our water resource center. And we had lumped together the costs for Dusty Road site, where the septage receiving facility is, and the water resource center. So we're more clearly articulating what the costs are to run each of those facilities. And that's why the increase. Director Hilt.
Yes, yes, thanks, Chair. So the follow-up would be so that the proposed increase or the expected increases would be based on historical practices of pumping out in the volumes. So you're using the past record. So if anyone wanted to look at that, they would be able to call up infrastructure services and going, how much leaves this plant on an annual basis? That would be something that's available to them.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. We keep track of all of our pump outs in a spreadsheet, and we took those historical numbers and multiplied the dumping fee increase and came up with the numbers that are in the report.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I understand the O&M expenses, and they're something that is unavoidable. You got to run the plant. The only issue I have is with Saginaw Ridge. There's 8 users paying the operations and maintenance cost for 29 existing lots and a potential to go to 40 lots. And it's expensive to run a plant that size. And yet if you don't run a plant that size, it'll deteriorate until it's not got any value to any of the users. So when something is not built out to that extent and the infrastructure is relatively new, I believe there should be a single charge rather than a frontage and a O&M. And it's strictly used to run the plant until the build out occurs. And then everybody will share the cost of future capital when it arises, whatever that percentage build out is. I don't know if it's 90, I don't know if it's 75, but I do know it's not 8 out of 40. So I could use some help from staff in figuring out, if we use that philosophy, what the heck that's called and what kind of a reserve we need to run the plant. And of course, is it legislatively acceptable before I settle on the 395 Saginaw Ridge.
Thank you. Staff, are you clear what's been asked?
Yes, Saginaw Ridge is a unique situation. As Director Lee alluded to there, currently frontage fees continue to subsidize operational costs. The degree to which that's a fair balance is something that's currently being reviewed as we speak.
Follow up to that, Director Lee?
Yes, I'd like to enter into a discussion with staff and with the users to see if we can arrive at an agreement. But I recognize that it needs to happen before that December 3rd date we just set, because we need to settle this as well at that time. This one's even more important than the capital one.
Okay, Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of tag onto that with something like Director Lee's mentioning with the build out aspect of things. I wonder, the Saginaw plant specifically, is that something that the regional district perhaps took on too soon from the developer? I know we're talking now whether we want to ever even own these things, but should there be some sort of policy that if we are going to take this thing on, it's not until 75 or 90% of the lots are connected and have structures on them, because that way that capital budgeting is a lot more fair and a lot more equitable.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. Normally, the plan is for the contractor to operate or pay the expenses of the plant for a year or two, and then the regional district normally would take it over at that time after it's proven that the plant works properly. Saginaw Ridge, I don't believe we took it over for, I'm not sure if Kyle knows the exact years, but 5 or 6 years or something like that. It's been running for a while now. It's not a brand new plant.
Kyle, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify for everyone, I believe it was taken over in 2018. The build out percentage at Saginaw Ridge is currently 28%. There are 3 other plants that range between 60 and 73% build out, and the remainder are all over 80% build out, if that helps perspective.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Saginaw Ridge is quite an unusual case. It was built and the developer didn't survive the build and it went under foreclosure. And the original, the financer still owned the lots until quite recently. So we are anticipating it to build out rather quickly now in the future because the economic conditions have changed, and all the lots, most of the lots that are in the Pender Harbor area have now all been sold, and these ones are selling and people are starting to build fairly rapidly. But I think we need to have as Director Toth just mentioned, I think we took this on because there was no other avenues available to the people to get the plant up and running. So it was kind of a, hey, I got a house, why ain't the plant working? And I think we were the only game in town. So we ended up taking it over, which I don't believe we would I don't believe we would normally do that with the developer. I think we would make them wait. I think the developer themselves would wait until it's about a 50% build out and then ask the regional district to take it over. That's from what I can understand from some developers that I've been talking to about when do plants get turned over to the SCRD.
Remco, did you want to weigh into this?
Yeah, I mean, only maybe piece of added information is that our current policy, and I think it's actually listed in policy, but correct me, but I would have to check that, is that we would take a plant over once it's completed. And the criteria for us taking it over is not degree of the development of the lots, is the plant completed and is the plant technically functioning as it should be. And that's why we took the Sakana Ridge plant over after several years it has been functioning. If that process moving forward should include a threshold of build out, that's to be discussed.
Director McMahon?
Yes, I think we should review our policy around taking on septic plants next year. Can we do that? Can we flag that to?
Would you like to make a recommendation that that policy be reviewed and get reviewed next year?
Yep.
And come to the board? Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any further comments or questions on that? All those in favor of that recommendation? Thank you. All right. So we have some recommendations on page 121. What would you like to do with regards to the user fee review? Director McMahon?
I would be happy moving this to the board meeting of December 3rd as well, just because it's part of a whole picture, so that when we're going out to the community to talk to them, they want to know all the numbers in one place.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on, Annex G, North Pender Harbor Water Service Area. And is there an introduction for this one?
Yes, Chair, I can do a brief introduction.
Thank you, Tina.
Yeah, so for the North Pender Harbor Water Service, Bylaw 422 regulates the rates and operations of the service and is reviewed annually. For the North Pender Service function, parcel taxes are intended to fund capital expenditures. So those are things to acquire, maintain the capital infrastructure, and user fees are intended to fund operational costs. So this is also supported as part of the board's financial sustainability policy that was just amended this past fall. So under the historical rate structure for the North Pender Service, a portion of the parcel taxes have been funding the operational expenditures. To address this imbalance, part of the proposal here is to address this imbalance with a recommended increase of 50% towards user fees for 2021, but with no increase to parcel tax. This would essentially mean a 28% overall increase, or approximately $208, depending on the property type. This will reduce the proportion of property parcel taxes required to fund the operations and move us towards a balanced fund structure. There has been some other options or alternatives that have been provided for the committee's consideration. However, staff are recommending the option number one. So in considering these rates for 2021, there were some other considerations. There was only a few budget proposals that were put forward for this particular service, but also there are some future considerations that staff have highlighted, and that's based on the future infrastructure needs for this particular service and the ongoing asset management and some of the deferred projects from 2021. So pending any board direction, the water rates and regulations bylaw will be amended and put forward to the board for 3 readings and adoption. A comprehensive communication strategy and engagement is to follow and is being developed by staff currently. So staff are here to take any questions.
Thank you. Directors? Director Lee?
It's my time to get picked on, I guess. Thank you, Chair. North Pender is kind of unique in the fact that it hasn't built out yet. It's subject to the same, very similar to what we were just talking about, and that is that there's 763 parcels, but only 525 billable water users. So, with the fact in mind that everybody gets fire extinguishers in front of their houses, everybody has the ability, as soon as they build, to get water. They don't have to wait. It seems to me that the frontage fees, the parcel tax levy, should be helping with the O&M, whether that you decrease the O&M and increase the parcel to make that happen. There should be some sort of formula, and I don't know what that formula would be, but I didn't see that option for me to consider there. And the other part of it is that with capital funding, we are still heavily into the likelihood of grants being available in the next year or two. So I question whether we should be launching into 100% capital plan, which shows parcel taxes paying for all of the infrastructure, current infrastructure. Not quite understanding, nor had the time to fully understand the capital side of it. I'd be interested in staff's comments on that if possible.
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to weigh in on policy, because the policy was brought to the board and we looked at how do we want to fund our capital. And we said user fees are going to pay for operations. So staff are following our direction in realigning the fees charged so that parcel tax covers off the capital and user fees cover off operational. So if that's something different, I think the policy would actually need to be revised. But I'll turn to staff.
Yes, that is correct. And also just perhaps what could be helpful is when we did amend the financial sustainability policy, we provided some background information as far as the Local Government Act and some best practice background, as well as public sector accounting standards. So we most certainly can forward that report to Director Lee, but most certainly there is some rationale. This is us aligning to ensure we're compliant with those particular standards, which is now defined in policy.
Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a very similar conversation to what we just had with Saginaw Ridge, in that, yes, the policy is when you get there, this is what you need. And this is, we're discussing a transition to that policy. I don't know. I'd rather see a gradual transition in this case than a one-time leap. So I'd be interested to know if that's possible. Again, still user pay, but that's the way life is.
Tina?
Well, staff have not provided that option because it's not aligned with policy. So was there something that the director had in mind as a suggestion, just understanding that would not align with policy?
Yeah, change the policy. Because perhaps if we form a new water system somewhere and a new water area, are we going to start out that way? And the first user pays for all of the O&M? So maybe do we have the policy right? That's basically the question.
Okay, so at this point, there are some recommendations on page 148. What would you like to do with those recommendations at this point? Director Lee?
From the discussion we just had, nothing's going to change between now and December 3rd. There's too many things that has to change, and we need to have this set. So I will make a motion to accept the recommendations as presented.
Okay, is there a seconder? All right, and this one is voting all directors. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on to Annex H. This is with South Pender. And there are some recommendations on page 155. Tina, did you want to speak to this?
Well, just noting that this one is where user fees, there isn't any working towards aligning. We made those amendments last year. So, and the proposed initiatives have been incorporated into the analysis. But also pointing out that for this particular service and the next report is those projects that were deferred as part of the 2020 budget and those things that are fully implemented in this year are also impacting the rates for these particular ones. So just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. Director Lee?
I'm basically okay with this, except for the dogwood. I don't think that dogwood should be done in 2021. It's hung around since, I believe, about a large number of years. And in this COVID economy, if we could put it off to 2022 without any particular impacts on our water, I would prefer to do that. I would also wish I had time to touch bases with staff prior to the meeting, but I must admit I run out of time messing with the wastewater. So if staff could comment on the possibility of putting the dogwood off and reducing the user fees and what the impact on user fees would be if we did that, I'd appreciate it.
If I could comment, so we've put in these as these are the pre-budget ones. They've been factored in here. So whatever recommendations that are coming forward as part of pre-budget are coming today at the board session. So perhaps if there was any modifications to those as part of that particular one, I would recommend deferring them to that time. Of course, by all means, if the corporate officer has any other suggestions. In how that would impact the rates, it would be very minimal. And so we don't really have something on the fly to kind of say how much it would reduce it by just this very minute. So I think it's in recognition that any modifications might contribute to the surplus, with just understanding that, the timing of when rates have to be approved and the budget cycle is a little bit of a challenge. So,
so if we did decide to not do the dogwood until 2022, and yet we approved this, all that would happen is we'd build up the reserves. And so in 2022, we would actually not have to raise it again with cost of living, theoretically. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball for quite that far. Okay. Page recommendations on page 55. I'd like to make a motion that we accept staff recommendations.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. All right. This is all directors. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on to Annex I, number 11. This is with regards to Regional Water Service Area 2021 Rate Bylaw Amendment. And Tina, you're speaking to this one?
Yes, if I could, and of course, GM Rosenboom, if you want to add anything, by all means. So this particular one, what I would just highlight again is that, of course, those projects that were deferred as part of 2020, the full implementation of those projects into 2021, and the multitude of projects that were proposed as part of pre-budget and their funding sources. So part of that has been incorporated in the analysis, but it also demonstrates how much the reserves have been impacted as a result of some of those funding options. And so part of the analysis has looked to how do we look to continue to contribute to those reserves in a, I guess, a sustainable way, something that's not too cumbersome to the user, but also looks to be able to react to emerging issues. There's also a lot of things to consider for the regional water system that we've highlighted in here. And those are based on the ongoing needs of the service. And so recognizing that these increases as we start to expand the water service and maintain our assets, that we're looking to do a more sustainable and long-term rate structure, so people understand what they're going forward with. So I don't know if GM has anything to follow, but essentially we're recommending approximately a 10% overall rate increase. So that's about 14% to user fees and 5% towards the parcel tax for 2021.
Thank you. And just from the agenda review, we asked about using percentages in here rather than dollar amounts. And the reason percentages are in here is that these are averages because the rate varies depending on the property, the category, and how they're billed, whether they're metered or not, etc. So Director Toth and then Director Lee.
Sorry, I saw that Remco had unmuted himself, so I don't know if he wanted to add to that before I ask my question.
Sorry, thank you. Remco?
I muted myself and then de-unmuted myself, but I can speak a little bit. No, in addition to what our CFO was indicating, the ultimate reserve levels as they are closed for next year, we're recommending that there will be an increase, but the reserve levels will still be lower than they were several years ago. So and given all the investments that are required, they will be hard needed moving forward. That's the only thing I can say.
Okay, Director Toth, Lee, and then McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. I hate the fact that we have to pass the fees before we approve all the budget requests, or deliberate and reject or pass them. Last year, I'd asked about reducing the capital contribution from $650,000 to $325,000, and it was pointed out that the fees were already set to accommodate a $650,000 contribution. So the budget request just went forward as is. It was part of the reason why we didn't look at the user fees and the rates as part of our pandemic response, is because they had to have been set in December. there wasn't anything we could do to adjust them that was going to make a difference. Looking at the chart on page 165, I see that our actual 2020 capital contribution is over $1 million, which is about 54% over that $650,000 budgeted amount. Even looking on the operational side, we're putting $561,000 of a surplus into reserves. So I guess, really my point is, do we need such a big increase again this year when we're putting away more money in 2020 than we even budgeted for?
Staff?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to answer this question. Part of the surpluses we're projecting for this year has to do with the fact that some of the staff that were approved to be hired last year, in part due to COVID, we were not able to hire them at the time that we were planning to hire them. So there are some staffing surpluses there in terms of hiring. And last year we had, and we still are this year, actually it's 2020, we're still having some vacancies in our utility services crew that are contributing to the fact, A, that there's operational surpluses, and B, that we don't have the capacity to actually start working on some of the capital reserve projects, the projects that were approved as part of the capital plan to actually improve our assets. So it's a combination of vacancies, late hiring, and some of the 650 you're referring to is the capital main replacement project budget. We have done a lot of design work, but there's currently only one project actually being constructed, and the rest we did the design work, and will be more projects actually implemented and constructed next year as part of that. So I agree there is a slow start, and it's contributing to the surpluses next year.
Sorry, just as a follow-up, I don't know if you were acknowledging me there, Chair. You're muted.
Thank you.
I guess the question, I would be more interested in seeing something like a 10% and a 0% for 2021, but I'd be interested in hearing from other directors about this, because if we pass it as is today, we're basically guaranteeing that all of the 2021 asks are going to move forward as is, because we'll have already agreed to fund them, whether or not we want to move forward with them. So really that's the question I have for my fellow directors.
Okay, so I'm going to weigh in there first. We had all these projects come to us at pre-budget. And at pre-budget, we said, move them forward. There were none that we said, we're not looking at doing this. So I think we are at this point considering all of those projects. The fact that staff brought them to us at this time, whether or not we do them this year or this coming year in the budget, or whether we do them the next year, we're going to need the money to pay for them. So just as Director Lee said, that Dogwood Reservoir piece, if it doesn't happen this year, it's going to happen next year. So we are preparing to actually fund what we need to fund. So I'm okay with moving this forward as is. Director McMahon?
I'm just going to say that the only water projects that I have questions about are a couple of the proposals for Eastbourne. And because I think that developing new wells for Eastbourne in addition to buying the well that we're looking at, I'm not sure that I would be prepared to support that, but that's a fairly small part of a very large water budget. So I'm okay with supporting the motion at this time.
Thank you. Any other comments from directors? So there are some recommendations on page 162. And this is voting all directors. Yes, Sherry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a correction to the voting for the Regional
Yes.
Water Service. It would be electoral areas A, B, D, E, F, and District of Seashelt.
Yes, thank you. Not Town of Gibson's. Thank you. All right. Would someone like to make some recommendations? Director Ties.
I'll move the recommendations as listed on page 162.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded? Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, Director Toth, you'd like that recorded? And do you want to state why you are opposed, please?
That's not normal procedure, but I think I stated why I was opposed before the motion was even put on the floor. So
it has to do with the timing inside of, okay?
the timing and the volume that's going into the reserves. I'm not convinced.
Thank you. Let's moving on to Annex J, page 169 to 174. And this is with regards to 2021 refuse collection fees. And is Robin speaking to this or Remco?
Our manager of finance is going to join.
Tina's going to speak to this. Okay.
No, I was actually, Brad was going to speak to it, but I can't see whether or not he's online.
Yeah, there he is.
Okay.
Brad, if you can unmute yourself, then it's up to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Refuse collection fees are applicable to residential properties in areas B, D, E, and F that are within the refuse collection service area. The rate setting framework we use for recommending these fees are to estimate the expenditures and the anticipated revenue that we would receive based on current rates. And we, from that, determine the required revenue and a recommended rate increase in relation to that. For this year, with the service changes that have occurred and the contracts that are in place until, I believe, the end of September 2025, we are proposing a 3-year rate plan, given the relative cost certainty that exists. And that plan incorporates rate stabilization using funds from the existing operating reserves in 2021, and then slowly building those reserves back up, or maintaining, I should say, at a level that is equivalent to 5% of annual operating revenue. So I'll leave it at that and take any questions.
Okay, Director Hiltz, and then I'll go on the list.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about the garbage tag. Was that within the scope of the fee review? We discussed this back last January about changing the fee from $2.50 a bag to some other more sustainable value. Did that actually happen? Or was it in the scope of this review, I guess, is the question.
Thank you for the question. Staff did not include it in this review, and staff are currently reviewing the potential increased number of garbage tags that are being used because of the change in the service program, and we'll evaluate that in several months' time and then report back to the board in terms of how much increase there is in usage, and if we're recommending any proposed changes to the price of the garbage tag, and potential harmonization with other local governments on the coast.
Thank you. So the conversation that I'd like to bring up is something that was actually started back in 2011. And it was talking about the fixed costs versus variable costs at the landfills. So we're in a situation where we are looking to divert more from the landfills, which means our tipping fees are decreasing. So, but we have fixed costs at the landfill. It's a conversation that I'd like staff to engage in looking at what are fixed costs that could be moved to variable costs inside of the contracts, et cetera, that we have. At that point, when we brought it up, we were told we had a 10-year contract with some of our providers, our service providers at the landfill. But I mean, the ideal situation would be that we had nothing going to our landfill, but if we have all these fixed costs, we are still paying for service at the landfill. So we need to look at that, and it becomes a philosophical conversation as well down the road when we look at what are our tipping fees to be versus our, tipping for things that can be recycled or repurposed versus tipping fees for actual garbage at the dump. So it's something that I think we need staff to look into, because we need to look at what the direction is going to be going forward. And that's going to be a broader conversation we're going to need to have at this table. Do you want a recommendation for that? Or is that part of, because I'll keep bringing it up. Remco?
Staff would appreciate some kind of recommendation along those lines, as it will help us in preparing RFPs, et cetera, moving forward.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this started coming up when we started looking at, the cost of metal, et cetera, right? All of the various things we're taking out. Okay, so recommendation would be that staff come back with a report outlining fixed costs versus variable costs of our landfill and potential implications for policy given increased diversion rates. All right, seconded. Okay, any further comments or anything on the recommendation? Director Toth.
I just wonder if we want to tag on to that with the intention to transition away from fixed costs.
Yes.
So.
Okay. And Director McMahon, are you okay with that amendment?
I'm not sure, because we haven't had this conversation yet. So I'm reluctant to state an intention before we look at the data.
Mm-hmm.
What I was going to say is that in all likelihood, we are going to have to transition to barging rubbish, even if we think it's only temporary, but we're going to have a situation there. And so the transition to that kind of costing is going to be really interesting too, because it changes our fixed and variable costs.
Maybe. Depends what our contracts are.
Yeah. But that, I'd welcome starting that kind of conversation too.
Okay, so at this point, we don't need to have with a view to that, because that can actually come out of the conversation we have around the recommendation. Okay. Any other comments, questions on the recommendation on the floor? Director Lee and then Director Hills.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I was caught a little off guard because I didn't start out one of the conversations that involved me.
I know.
When you say moving from fixed costs to variable costs, which theoretically are tied to volumes, do you have some services in mind, or will that come out during the discussion? Because a lot of times we're asking our contractors to invest fairly heavily in equipment to do the job, and unless they have some certainty, they can't invest in it unless they overcharge us for the variable costs and gamble on that. So I'd be interested exactly when we talked variable costs, the impact it will have on our total cost of running the dump.
Mm-hmm. I think that'll be part of the report.
Good.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Is the current motion, does the scope of that get covered in this future landfill report study that's coming forth? Are they, they sort of come together? Are they separate, or would this be embedded in the scope of that future landfill options report project that's on the books?
Remco?
Thank you. The report, the future landfill options analysis, will include a cost estimate of total cost and MSW, municipal solid waste, tipping fees based on and operational costs based on current policy around what is fixed, what is variable. So a report as currently considered by the board would direct staff to do a parallel analysis. Staff could, based on those recommendations, do a parallel analysis how other scenarios would look like to fund the same cost.
Follow-up, Director Hiltz?
So the timing would be that if they're parallel, one would come first, or they would come at the same time. It's pretty hard to guess, I'm thinking, at this point, but just the timing of there's no timing parameter to the motion on the floor right now to tie these processes together.
Yeah, given that one process is already underway and staff's current ability, I'm not sure if we can able to, in terms of timelines, combine the two such that they can both be presented in January to the board. However, we can do it shortly afterwards. And in a way, because it's so future looking and it's more how we pay for it than the total amount. I think it's not impacting that much the ultimate ability for the board to provide direction on future options in general.
Thank you. Director Toth?
Thank you. Yeah, that was going to be my comment, is whether it applies to future disposals or, the remaining years of life we have left at our current landfill. We should still be looking at this, especially if we've got contracts that are up for renewal in 2021 or 2022. I just had a procedural question. The agenda cover page shows that this staff report is voting all, but I don't believe that's correct. And then the follow-up question to that is, this motion that is now on the floor, is that voting all, or is that voting just the electoral areas because it came out during discussion on this report? Thanks.
I'm going to weigh in. Sherry, go ahead, but then we'll see what you say. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify that the voting does need to be corrected for this item, so it should be electoral areas B, D, E, and F for refuse collection. The motion on the landfill report, that may apply to all.
Okay. So there's a recommendation on the floor with regards to fixed and variable costs. Any further questions or comments on that one? All those in favor? Thank you. And then there are some recommendations on page 169. Areas B, D, E, and F. Director McMahon?
I'll move those recommendations.
Okay, Director Ties is seconding them. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? B, D, E, and F. Awesome. Passes. Annex K. Pages 175 to 176. And who would like to speak to this one?
Again, I will do, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to request an amendment to the budget for for legal and other technical support for the implementation of the Sea Shield Nation Foundation Agreement. That support is required and to ensure that SCRD's interests are adequately included in any land transfer that's taken part as part of the implementation of that foundation agreement. Significant progress has been made to date, and work is ongoing and will continue until 2021. And so that's why further additional funds are requested. Thank you. And staff, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Director Ties, Director Command.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the allocation of the funding, and it says in the recommendation that it's to be funded from the Regional Water Service operating reserves. So while most of the infrastructure affected by the foundation agreement is our water treatment plant and the associated infrastructure with that, there is also a landfill component to that. And I would argue that the foundation agreement is something that affects the whole coast. And I'm just wondering if this should not be coming out of general government.
Thank you. And who would like to weigh in on that one? Remco?
I can give it a try. In terms of the landfill component, there's actually no landfill component is itself not only very limited part of this agreement. There are some minor landfill components to it. I agree with that, but the vast majority of the discussions are related to regional water. So it could change it that in part they were funded by part of the funding would also come from regional solid waste, regional solid waste 350. But that would be then be a minor portion of the total.
Director McMahon?
Slightly off topic, but if staff could remind me where we stand with a budget for working with the Squamish Nation.
Tina, do you have anything on that, or Dean?
I refer that one to our CEO.
Okay. Dean? Funding to work with the Squamish Nation.
Yeah, are you talking about the capacity funding idea?
Donna?
Well, we are trying to move forward a protocol agreement. We've been trying to do that for some time, and we have no budget line item for it. So how are we ever going to get it done?
But you're referring specifically to the Squamish Nation, not Shishel. So we have not initiated any formal MOU or discussions on a foundation agreement with the Squamish Nation. However, we've had some preliminary discussions with the Squamish Nation around the new Brighton dock and their plans for potentially disposing of that asset. As well, we may be having some discussions, not directly with the Squamish Nation, but around the idea of capacity funding for nations like the Squamish Nation with some other communities. And I've reached out to other regional districts to find out what, if anything, any of the regional districts have in place in terms of capacity funding or funding things like that with First Nations communities, and have not received any responses yet. I'm not aware of any regional districts that have those mechanisms in place or what those mechanisms might be, but I know that some communities, and certainly Metro Vancouver, is starting to look at what that might look like moving forward with First Nations in terms of things like capacity funding.
I just keep flagging this because we want to do a regional growth strategy, and we need to be consulting with the Squamish as part of that. Not to mention that we need to be consulting with them anyway.
Director Beamish?
I was just going to raise two things. One, a point of order, could we stay on topic of the report that we're on? But also, secondly, that if we are going to be voting, it indicates all directors on this one. I'm not comfortable voting on expenditures from the Regional Water Fund.
Sherry?
Thank you, Chair. I will recommend a correction on the voting for this item as well. So it would be areas A, B, D, E, F, and District of Sechelt.
Thank you. Did we want to make a recommendation with regards to the service it's funded from? Director McMahon?
Yeah, I would like to review that because for one thing, we would be in the silly position of the SIGD not being able to vote on the funding for the foundation agreement if it's coming from the water service, if I understand correctly. So, so can we approve the budget but have staff look at where is the most appropriate place to draw that budget from?
Marco? And then Sherry?
The most appropriate source of funding would still be one of the services. So it will be the regional water service, and it can be combined with regional solid waste. It's 350. And if desired by the board, I can recommend a split based on the requested amount.
Thank you. Director Toth?
Thank you, Chair. I was actually going to comment that staff did provide a recommendation there, and that's that it comes out of the regional water service. Knowing that we've got $561,000 going into the operating reserves for regional water service for 2020, I'm okay to move the recommendations as presented with the funding source as indicated in the report.
Is there a seconder for that recommendation? And this is A, B, D, E, F, and District of Sechelt. So I'm going to second that for discussion. I think what I know our staff to do is when they are, at the end of the year, they will look at if there is any component that should not have come out of regional water and would potentially, at that point, if there was some, come forward with a budget amendment and a financial plan amendment to put it to the correct area. So I think at this point, we're looking at setting aside the money, and any adjustments that have to be made could be made at that time. I think we've raised the idea with staff, so they'll be watching for that. Any further comments or questions? There's a recommendation on the floor. All those in favor? Thank you. That is the last item on our agenda. Is there any new business? I would look for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And then Director Ties.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a question posed by a member of the public regarding the charges to the wastewater and where they would appear. Whether they would be coming on the property tax bill or on the utility fees, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've got two separate agenda items. Is that if I'm not mistaken, the parcel taxes are part of the property tax bill, which means that seniors could defer that part of their payment if they have that set up, and user fees can come out of the utility statement, which is something that currently can't be deferred. So that's a substantial difference, and if I've got this wrong, please correct me.
Mm-hmm. Tina, do you want to go ahead, Tina?
Yeah, so actually both the frontage fees and the user fees actually go on the utility bill. So the frontage fees is not treated like the parcel tax. It's not part of the parcel tax review panel. So no, that is one of the things that when we went through the report that our corporate officer produced, these were some of those things. Is if we decouple some of the service and look to amending some of these bylaws going forward, these would be some of the things we would look at, but there would be some steps to take beforehand.
Thank you. So that question that was just answered was question that had come from the public earlier on in the meeting. So now, are there any other questions from attendees in the gallery? We've got one hand up with Andy Jones-Cox.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I am a resident in the Square Bay Wastewater area. So one of the folks that Laurie and Dean and others were involved in conversation yesterday. I won't try and rehash a whole lot of what was said there. I just did want to say a couple of things and ask you a question. As a district, we're fully understanding of the need for an asset management plan, perfectly willing to participate in it. Our objections to what we see right now are the 50-year time frame. I don't feel like anybody can plan conditions 50 years into the future. And attempting to fully fund capital asset replacement over that time period through a capital reserve fund is very problematic for us, especially if you try to avoid any future borrowing. It seems to load all of the cost on taxpayers today for an economic benefit which will accrue in 30 or 40, 50 years' time. It's very sustainable, but it's not in the slightest bit equitable. So I think it was Councillor Lee suggested there might be an advisory group for wastewater regions. We would be very happy to participate in that and agree that it would be a grand idea. We have ideas to offer, and we'd love to put them in there and have them considered more fully. So in light of all of that, we would very much like for the report, the frontage fee review report that was gone over in some detail, not to be forwarded to the board because, the idea that, as Leonard Lee, Councillor Lee said as well, there might be a nominal charge added for capital reserve to start a capital reserve fund growing of $50 or something. Well, we wouldn't object to that kind of thing. But as soon as you put that whole report in, you now see all these different options for escalating fees over the coming 5 years, which will turn into 10 years. And in effect, we will be paying exactly what we're objecting to. And so we would ask you to defer the entire report, consider a budget line item for 2021 as a one-off, because this is not a one-off what we see now, but defer the report. So that's what I wanted to say in summary for everything that we talked about yesterday. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Andy. Both 7 and 8, so Annex E and Annex F, which are capital and operations for wastewater, have been deferred. They are not going to the board this afternoon.
Yes, I understood that was, however, that on December 3rd, likely with some further discussion, they might go forward to the board then, and I'm asking that they won't be then either, that report will not be forwarded as is on December the 3rd.
I think what you're asking is not necessarily that the report not go forward, but that the recommendations in the board for the multi-year implementation not be approved.
I agree. Yes.
Thank you. I think that's been the direction that the conversation went today. Thank you. And then Gary Knorr, you have your hand up. Question, Gary.
Yes, thank you for this. And I'm a part of the Square Bay group, and I would like to suggest for you to think about, this is probably directed to Dean, but basically there seems to be a philosophy hold up here between our group and the SARD board. It might be worthwhile to allow a few members of our group to explain where the frustration comes from. It's not on what staff did, it's what's coming across. We have a brand new plant and we're being asked to build a new one with the funds put away today. And so I'm requesting, if you can think about it.
Oh, sorry, we all of a sudden can't hear you, Gary.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now you're back. So
I said, my question is to talk to Dean and your staff and the board to allow us to do a presentation, which would be good for all the areas to hear from what the frustration, what the philosophy differences are between where you're going or your asset management program versus what the people are doing that are paying.
Okay, thank you. Gary, I think you could reach out to our corporate officer to see about making that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Were there any emails sent in to IT? Any other questions
Received no
come
emails.
through? Not hearing anything further. It is now 1:16. Yes, what time should we start the board meeting?
I'm going to suggest 2 o'clock to allow staff enough time to do turnover and allow everyone some time for lunch.
Okay, is that sufficient?
Would that
time?
work for, is that sufficient for staff as well?
Yes, okay. So we're going to start up our board meeting at 2 o'clock. Thank you all. See you at 2.